Meeting of the Planning Board of November 21st, 2019. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Joseph, how you doing?
Welcome, everyone. Before we get started, we have a few continuances that we'd like to get through. If I may have a motion, please.
Well, the holidays are coming.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to take item 7I out of order for discussion purposes.
Second,
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 7-0. Item 7I is a continued public hearing, application for approval of a site plan, One Wheeler Road. U66 Corporation is the applicant.
Madam Chair, make a motion to continue this matter to the Planning Board meeting of December 5th, 2019, as requested by the applicant in email dated November 20th, 2019.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0.
to take item 7J out of order for discussion purposes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0. Item 7J is a continued public hearing, application for approval of a special permit pursuant to Section 4.3.2.22.2, Solar Energy System ground-mounted of the zoning bylaws, 50 Margaret Street, Northeast Solar Services doing business as Revolution is the applicant.
Madam Chair, make a motion to continue this matter to the planning board meeting of December 5th, 2019, as requested by the applicant in an email dated November 19th, 2019.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0. One more.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to take items 7K and 7L together and out of order for discussion purposes.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 7-0. Item 7K is a continued public hearing, application for approval of a special permit pursuant to Section 4.3.2.6, outdoor storage of supplies and equipment incidental to permitted uses, subject to requirements for location, lighting, screening, fencing, cover, and safety precautions of the zoning bylaws, 376 Cambridge Street. The Granite Place Incorporated is the applicant. And item 7L is a continued discussion, application for approval of a minor engineering change, 376 Cambridge Street. The Granite Place Incorporated is the applicant.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
Did the building inspector make a determination on this? Were we waiting?
It's, we're being told it is in the motion.
So they have, Madam Chair,
Oh,
if I
yes.
may. They have asked to continue. As you know, they're searching for other locations.
Right.
We have told them that we will continue. However, as you read the motion, you'll note that we have required them to meet all of the issues that have been identified in the cease and desist orders, as well as provide us an update as to their intention to move forward with the special permit before our next meeting. So
Okay.
your continuance to the next meeting is conditional on all the building department orders, which include, as you'll see in the motion, the removal of debris around the property and roadways, ensuring operations are all done indoors with the doors closed, washing of any equipment indoors, shutting off of all non-security lights after close of business, all those things. As well as all the other issues that are contained in the cease and desist orders need to be resolved.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Your continuance,
they're being allowed to operate with those conditions.
we are
Was there a
continuing them.
determination that this was an allowed use?
It was a determination that the fabrication that was happening now in the small unit C was allowed to continue. What they had proposed was expanding that fabrication to almost 50% of the building. The building department determined that was not going to be possible and not permitted under zoning, and therefore that's one of the reasons why they're looking
Yeah.
elsewhere for
If I may
other
actually,
sites.
so they can continue as they are now as far as the building inspector's concerned?
In the small,
Yes.
I
With
mean, the
these-
building
and
is
with these
3 tenant spaces.
Yeah.
changes.
This one probably was not even 20% of the building, whereas they have now the whole building.
Right.
So they could stay in that piece, but not expand the fabrication further.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can someone read the motion for me, please?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to continue this matter to the Planning Board meeting of December 5th, 2019, as requested by the applicant's engineer in an email dated November 6th, 2019, The continuance is conditional on the applicant agreeing to remedy all the issues outlined in the cease and desist orders issued by the building department, including removal of any debris around the property and roadway, ensuring operations are all done indoors with the doors closed, including the washing of any equipment, and further to shut off all non-security lights after close of business, including the signage. The applicant shall provide an update and timeline of the intentions to move forward with this application prior to the next planning board meeting of December 5th, 2019.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 7-0. Okay, next on our agenda is citizens' time. If there is someone here who would like to speak on an item that is not on our agenda, please come forward. Hello, welcome. Please have a seat and please state your name for the record.
Hi, Anthony Matarazzo, 2 Dartmouth Road. I'm here to talk about General Walker Estates. And I just want to say that, I'm not here to talk about what other abutters have already gone over. I understand that's being looked into. I've also sent an email last week that I know the various town departments need time to look into, so I'm not here to talk about that either. There is one specific item that was in my email that I feel if I don't elaborate on and maybe show a quick visual, that it won't be addressed properly. It's something that I've been trying to address for quite a while, and what it is, if you don't mind, I have something that I think will help if you could look at it.
Sure, absolutely. Why don't you give it to Liz and she'll hand it out to us? Thank you.
Sure. So what it is it's just showing you the grant of location. So for those of you familiar with the project, prior to this project, what the street was a small cul-de-sac that went straight ahead with a cul-de-sac, and there were just 3 houses, one on each side and one at the top of the circle. And so what they've done is the road has been extended off to the right, and there's a cul-de-sac further down the road. On the left-hand side of what used to be the cul-de-sac, that is now grass. We'll call it grass. It's not quite grass, but that's what I'm going for. So due to the fact that existing cul-de-sac is no longer a cul-de-sac, the developer had to go in front of, had to petition Eversource and Verizon to do a grant of location to relocate a telephone pole. The key word being relocate. So what happened was, because the existing telephone pole is now 50 or so feet off of the street, it looks like it's in my front yard. It's technically town property, but at this point, it's just all grass, so it looks like my front yard, and there's just a telephone pole sitting in the middle of it. There's also a new telephone pole that's actually on the street. I know I only handed out 2 of the actual pictures. The first picture will show you, it'll give you a visual of what it looks like. You can see the 2 telephone poles, and I think the issue is that that telephone pole is supposed to be gone. And what's happening is because nobody is, the developer made it very clear at the Conservation Committee meeting last week that they want to just finish this project and get out. So at this point, I don't believe they're gonna do anything about that telephone pole because they were supposed to be raising the house that you see in that picture,
Right.
and building a new house. And when I asked Eversource and why this pole wasn't coming down, I get a different story every time I ask, but mainly you'll see that the house used to be straight ahead on that
Right.
cul-de-sac. Now it's not even facing the street. So what they're telling me is that if they tried to run the electric from the new pole, the roof is in the way. And what's happening is because nobody is really enforcing, in my opinion, enforcing the fact that pole needs to go. And when Verizon and Eversource go up there to do work, it's not being supervised. So, for example, when Verizon, the 2 new houses that are being occupied on the street, when Verizon came up there to run the cable, they're going to do whatever's easiest, right? The people that are doing the work don't have the background on this project. So instead of going from the pole they're supposed to go to, they just see that pole 50 feet away and say, oh, all I need to do is run a wire from that pole not knowing that pole's supposed to be going away.
So, Mr. Moderato, if I understand correctly, the new pole is not being used at all. They're using the old pole that is in the grass.
The new pole is being used to run the underground electricity to the new houses. So it's only has high voltage on it, from what I understand. I don't even know what that means, but that's what I'm told. It does have wires on it, but
But no street light.
the second thing is the street light. So as you can see in that picture, that street light has been shining down on the grass for over a year now. I finally contacted the engineering department, and they put in a work order with Eversource because they said we can't put the street light over there till they run the electric. My fear there is that if nobody supervises that, what they're going to do is the same thing that Verizon did, and they're going to make it even harder for me to get this pole removed, because what they're going to do is they're going to take the electric that's on that pole 50 feet away, and they're just going to run it over to that new pole. Unless somebody is there to tell them, no, that pole is going away, you have to run it off, the pole that's staying. So engineering is working on moving the light, but when I asked engineering about the pole, they told me at first that, it's the Verizon owns the pole, and, they gave me the explanation that, there's a packing order for people to get the stuff off of the pole. But what I was trying to explain to them is that was the answer that I would expect if I was calling about a random telephone pole that wasn't part of a subdivision. This pole is part of an approved subdivision plan.
Right.
Is supposed to be
Removed. Yes.
So then they told me to contact the construction supervisor at Verizon, which I, as an abutter, I did. Absolutely.
I'm going to interject now just because
Yeah,
during my tenure on the Board of Selectmen, we dealt with these things a lot.
okay.
And actually, the Board of Selectmen's got way more control over those than we do, because these companies like Verizon and, the Eversource, and they come before the Board of Selectmen regularly to have guy wires put on poles, to have poles installed, to have things like that. What we used to do on the Board of Selectmen was we'd tell them, we're not going to approve that till you remove the extra poles, or you remove that pole, or you remove our pole. So in other words, they have a little bit of leverage where we really don't have any leverage. And quite honestly, your developer probably doesn't have any leverage with them. So when they want something, they need to be told, you'll get it when you do your job, when you remove your poles that you're not using and things like that. So I'm not sure. I mean, we could probably put a letter in or something like that, but I'm not sure that we're going to have any pole whatsoever with anybody in there.
I understand what you're saying. I think, so the grant of location was approved a year ago, so they put in the new pole, but it's the old pole and so I guess what I'm here today for is, I'm just trying to get somebody to execute on the plan
You
that
need
was
someone to take
approved.
ownership of this problem.
Like,
That's what it sounds like to
And
me.
because right now, I'm the one calling Verizon and calling Eversource, and we have an approved plan that, as part of the subdivision, that says this is what's supposed to happen. And all I'm trying to do is get that to happen.
I understand. Kristen, you're understanding the same as Mr. Impemba's, that this is something that has to be brought to the Board of Selectmen?
I think that helps, but it is part of the subdivision as well, though. So I think it is twofold, and as Mr. Matarazzo also mentioned, we have a lot of questions about this house. It was supposed to be a new house. They seem to be renovating the house. The building department is working with them as they found out certain things were done without permits. They have permits pending. There's a question as to, because this lot is held under the covenant, if it's not a new house, does it need to be released from the covenant from you before the building permits are released? So unfortunately, there's multi-layers. But to Member Impemba's point, the Board of Selectmen grant approved grants of locations all over town. While this was a while back, they have other ones, that they certainly can, during the conversation, as Member Mpemba saying, well, you're looking for a grant of location here, a grant of location from Verizon, Verizon came in, then I would put it on their radar to bring it up during that conversation, because I do think it has been effective, and you get the people, the permitting people that know, okay, I really need this here, so, on their end, the conversation gets dealt with from Verizon. So I think that definitely helps, and I would encourage you to go to Citizens Time with the Board of Selectmen or write a memo to the Selectmen, just about the point of, this was a grant of location that you granted. I know there's other ones. If you see Verizon, please bring this up because it is a pending issue. At the same time, with the subdivision, there's electric shown within the subdivision. There's different other utilities that the new pole had to do with, that this old pole shouldn't be not needed anymore. So as part of the completion of the subdivision, we can certainly go down that route as well. But I think it's a twofold approach to be successful. Because to move a pole, and this isn't the only pole in town, I mean, I don't know if you remember when Wayside Commons literally had a pole in the middle of its driveway for 2-3 years. So I wish I could say moving poles was really easy, but it's not. So I think as much as...
It's like an act of God. In other words, they're going to tell you, they're going to coordinate the power company, the cable company, that they're going to give you every excuse in the world of why they can't do it. So you need to use the only leverage you have, which is when they go before the Board of Selectmen, when they ask for something, you say no, until you get rid of the extra poles that are, because there's sister poles all over the town, double poles where they should be removing them. But an instance like that could be something that they clearly address the next time they come up before them.
Sure.
Not that we wouldn't want to go from this end as well.
Right.
But we can put all the pressure in the world we want on the developer. The developer's only going to get the same story from whoever owns that pole. And these poles are owned by, some of them are owned by Verizon, some of them are owned by Eversource. It all depends on who owns that one. And then that company has to then coordinate with all the other companies that are on it, and it's horrible.
Right.
But you got to give them an incentive. When you want something, when they want something, then you tell them they'll get it when they do it.
Right.
And they'll prioritize it. That's the only way you can get it prioritized, unfortunately. That's the only way we've found that you can get it prioritized.
Okay.
I
Thank
agree.
you.
And I would also reach out to the building department in terms of, as I mentioned before, when this house was supposed to be a new house as part of the subdivision, the electric was supposed to come off the new pole.
Correct.
So if they are aware of whatever the renovations that are happening, I think I would make them aware that was the original, because we also have an issue with the driveway location, and there's really no access into the new cul-de-sac. As you know, that's an ongoing issue. So it's not the only one, but I would certainly continue to put it on people's radar, so as the opportunity to have the conversation is in front of us, we have it.
Okay. I appreciate it, and I will go to the Board of Selectmen. I guess the only other thing I want to say about this is just that the issue, a couple of things. Number one, as part of the plan, all of the electric that was part of the subdivision is supposed to be underground. And so there's a transformer in the island of the cul-de-sac with the electricity running to all the different houses. And I have to imagine that at the time that they did that, they still thought they were going to be building a new house there. So there's got to be electricity, otherwise they'd have to dig up the whole road. There's got to be electricity going from that transformer to that house. Now, they've made a decision that hasn't even been approved by anyone to not knock that house down, and they've started remodeling that house. So I've been told from the start, from the various utilities, that pole will come down when this house gets knocked down and the new house gets built, because right now, the roof's in the way. Well, now, unless somebody forces them to, the house is not coming down. So now I'm saying to myself, okay, everybody told me this pole would come down when the new house gets built. Well, now the new house isn't getting built.
Right.
So I feel like the electric is still supposed to all be underground for the subdivision. So when I talked to Verizon, they told me, look, Eversource, as long as this house is here, this pole's not going anywhere, because they're not going to move this wire. The roof's in the way. So you have to get somebody to get this electric to this house underground in order to get this pole removed.
Okay.
So that's the
No,
only
I
other thing I
understand the
wanted to.
concern. Kristen, I have a related question, but something that you said, that they were doing this work on this house without the proper permits and that the permits are pending. I know that I have absolutely no say in this whatsoever, but it would be my position that they should not be granted permits for that house to do anything there until they resolve all the issues that they have outstanding. Is that the position of the building department as well?
That is the that is the position of
Okay,
us, the building
great.
department, planning department. We have some questions into council that we're still talking through about new house, renovated house, where, you know, just to kind of sort it out to make sure that, if we hold that line, then, you know, we're doing things correctly. But yes, that's the position
Okay.
of where we all are. They
Do
did go to
we-
the Conservation Commission last week, and Ed Champy, who's the head of Waypoint, did attend that meeting. He has not attended our meetings in the past, and did express a lot of good conversation about remedying certain things. So after that, Building, Conservation, and myself had a discussion that, you know, we really need to bring everybody together and figure, and with him in the room, figure out who's doing what, who's doing the work. I mean, I don't know if they're subcontractors or what, just who's doing what and what's happening with this house, what's happening with the other two lots. As you know, the other two lots are for sale, just what their plans are.
They can't sell them.
So we're trying to.
So they're advertising them for sale, but they are not, they cannot sell them, correct?
Not until they're released from this
Right.
board. So.
Am I correct in understanding that currently, they do not have permission to be doing any work on those sites at all, and they are not able to sell the lots either?
Correct, and they have orders from the building department to get all the heavy equipment off.
Okay.
the other sites that.
Are you seeing work progressing?
I haven't in a
Okay.
couple of weeks,
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
so,
So,
Well,
but
at
anyway,
least something
just
might be working then.
yeah, thank you.
Okay,
to try to get the team in to figure out
okay,
who's who, as we continue to figure out all these other issues as
thank
well.
you. And thank you, Mr. Mazzarazo, for bringing this forward, and for continuing to stay on it. I know that this has been extremely difficult for you and for your neighbors, but especially for you. And we appreciate both your patience and your keeping us informed.
Appreciate it. So I've already taken up enough of your time. I'll end it there. I guess I just want to ask one question before I go, and that is, you know, I'm happy to talk to the Board of Selectmen, but I still don't quite understand. So if this pole is supposed to be removed as part of the subdivision, then why wouldn't the appropriate town department, and I don't know who that would be, whether it would be engineering, whether it would be building department, why don't they work with the developer and with Verizon and Eversource and fix this? Why do I have to go to the Board of Selectmen?
It's a very good question, and I think that should happen and will happen. We're just suggesting that you can
Understood.
also apply
Will do.
pressure from the other side using the Board of Selectmen. So
Okay.
that's not instead of
Okay.
what's going to happen on the departments, from the departments of engineering and building and planning. This would be in addition to
Okay.
that, just to apply
Great.
a little extra pressure.
All right, thank you very much for your time. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on a matter not on our agenda? Okay, seeing no one, we will move forward to announcements. Actually, I have one that I want to say before I forget. I wanted to offer congratulations to Selectman Nick Priest and his wife Jennifer on the birth of their fourth child, I think, of baby girl. So congratulations, Nick and Jennifer.
Sure. So announcements, Thanksgiving holiday is coming up sooner than I can believe. November 27th, so the Friday, town offices close at 3 PM as opposed to the regular 7 PM. And Wednesday, sorry, Wednesday, we close at 3 instead of 7. And then the Thursday and the Friday, the 20th and 29th, town offices will be closed. There is a suggested subcommittee that we just wanted to put on your radar. We would like to hold a suggested subcommittee to discuss the text amendments and rezoning in the IH district on Tuesday, December 3rd at 11. Let us know if that jives with your schedule.
We'll send another email.
We'll send
out.
an
We just
email,
wanted
but
to
just
mark
heads
the
up.
calendar.
Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, there's a meeting on November 11th at 6 PM in the Town Hall Annex Basement Meeting Room. And just for everybody's, just so everybody knows, there's the deadline for general warrant articles for the January town meeting happens on December 13th.
So is that November 11th date on the zoning bylaw review committee, is that, that's past a couple of weeks? So is there?
Yes.
No, it's December
11th. Wrong month, I'm sorry, December 11th, I apologize.
December.
December 11th.
December. And I just had one last announcement, and I wanted to thank Representative Ken Gordon. On Monday, he brought the Joint Committee on Economic Development to the new building at Northeastern to discuss life science in the suburbs. He had an impressive panel. He had Secretary Mike Keneally, he had folks from Leahy, Northeastern, as well as Travis McCready from the Life Science Center.
And our very own Kristen Kastner as well.
And I kicked off the panel, which was good, I hope. But no, it was a very good discussion and good panel. And then after
It was.
they toured the Millipore site, and the Northeastern site as well as the Millipore site. So I think it was just fantastic that he brought the committee out to Burlington and everyone saw what was happening here. And as much as, we think there's a lot going on here, it's nice to see people from other parts of the state say, oh, so.
If one quick announcement, just wanted to announce that Cornell football beat Dartmouth, spoiling their perfect season this year. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob, did I
You know how to hurt again.
Any other announcements? Okay, let's move on. We do not have any legal notices or non-approvals, so we'll move on to item 6, administrative matters. Item 6A is a continued discussion, application for approval of a minor engineering change, 84 Bedford Street, Crown Castle for Sprint is the applicant. Hello and welcome. If you could state your name for the record.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Dan Klasnick. I'm an attorney. I represent Crown in this matter.
Okay, thank you. Before you go into your presentation, I wanted to just inform the board of where things stand with this. This is the site at the cemetery, what, Pine Haven? Pine Haven Cemetery with the pole that we've been discussing. This is, as we all know, town-owned property, town-controlled property. Therefore, the planning board reached out to the Board of Selectmen who control that property for feedback on this application. They have declined to give us any direction. We also reached out to town council, and town council has informed us that we do not have the right to deny this application. So we are left in a position where we really, we don't have any direction from the Board of Selectmen, we don't have authority over the property, and are unable to deny the application. Therefore, it is my suggestion to the board, and I'm willing to hear everyone else's comments, my suggestion to the board is that we take no action and allow this to proceed, but we do not put our blessing on it. And I am very willing to hear everyone else's opinions. Yes, Ernie?
Is the basic concern that it will not look like a flagpole any longer if they do what they want to do? Is that what we're concerned about?
I think that is one of the big concerns, yes.
Okay.
But from my understanding, we don't really have authority over that,
Okay.
according to
So-
town council.
So then why, in fact, did they,
Why did it come here in the first
Yeah, I'm
place?
still trying to figure that out.
We don't know.
It was brought to our attention by the building department, building inspector Ungerson. He got the application in, he said this is a change to what we have on this, on the original
Right,
plan, so he thought he was doing the
Yes,
right thing. We
Everyone
thought we
thought
were
we were
doing the right
Okay.
thing.
Well, let me actually
still
interject.
trying to figure out-
According to our local regulations, they should be in front of us.
Right.
okay.
So therefore, this is what I was alluding to at the last meeting and have alluded to in some correspondence, that the interpretation of section 6409A of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, when I got the question from town council, have you reviewed the consistency with what I just said? I said, what? So, as I've mentioned before, we did a very broad review of wireless in the town of Burlington a long time ago, and it was fantastic, and it really helped us set the stage for how we made decisions moving forward. There have been a few key pieces of law and policy and other things that have been put in place over the last couple of years that do affect a little bit how we do things, and that's why I had mentioned and asked the chair and to consider in the future, trying to think about more holistically wireless in town, think about putting together a warrant article to really make sure that we have a broad review like we've done in the past, so we don't get in the situations that we kind of have a little bit of confusion in this situation. We just want to make sure that we're consistent in our regulation, consistent in our policy with federal guidelines, and make sure we know where we do have controls.
Right. And
So-
and as Kristen said, I completely support the idea that we should put together a warrant article to hire a consultant so that we can gain a better
Sure.
understanding of
Right.
what the current laws are, so that we know that we're conforming and that we can form a plan that makes sense for Burlington moving forward. But right now, we don't have that. And what we do have is some direction from town council.
So is this going, excuse me, Mayor,
Yes.
is this going to be like an amendment to our tower location bylaw and so forth, or?
No, this is, when, are you talking about as a
Yeah,
result of the?
if we're going to start to see changes in these,
Oh, okay.
because we're seeing this one.
Right. I
And,
think what
and we have a
Kristen's-
bylaw for
Right.
location, but I don't know if we have a bylaw for, you
Other,
know,
yeah.
because I would be the most offended, because when I step out on Paulson Drive, I look directly at that pole. So,
I think the answer is if town meeting were to approve funding for us to hire a consultant, that consultant would probably advise us as to how we might want to change our laws moving forward, but we don't really know how that would actually come about or what it would look like at this time.
Well, we recently spent a lot of time going through the drill with Wegmans
Yes,
and the
and this would,
towers, so.
yes, this would help with that as well, so.
Yeah, that would be nice if
Yeah.
town meeting would do that,
Right.
because rather than us trying to be experts,
I agree.
it worked out well when we did
Right.
that.
But in terms of this particular application that's in front of us,
Yeah.
it's my understanding that we don't really have much of a choice. Is there anyone else who has a different perspective? Yes, Bill?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I agree with Member Covino here. I would like to act on this. If the motion here does say, maybe changes, instead of suggesting to the applicant to increase the diameter, you increase it all the way down. So again, it looks like a monopole because their application as submitted, it no longer looks like a monopole.
Correct. It's like a popsicle stick.
I would not, I think the last time I said there was certain things in certain other places where you have like the Georgia Peach Water Tower. This is going to look something different. It won't look like a monopole. So I would say if we do vote on that, and again, the word suggest really allows the applicant not to do it. So if we just,
Yes.
we would say that what the applicant has to do is to make a sustained monopole, meaning that it's mono and it doesn't change its shape as they go up. So that's where I'm at on this one.
And that is an option. We can certainly do that if that is the will of the board. I have no objection to that. I don't know if it's enforceable.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
May I address the applicant?
Please.
Just curious, you clearly see, kind of, there's a position that we're disheartened about the aesthetics of what you're putting forth. Crown Castle has deep pockets, Sprint has deep pockets. Why wouldn't you do something to accommodate the town, especially knowing it is in a cemetery, it is a sacred place, so to say?
Well, following the meeting that I think we had back in October in regards to this, one of the approaches, or what my client did take a look at, is the practicality of what is being suggested, and it's not a practical solution. From what I'm being told, these facilities are designed in such a way that the top portion is plastic or fiberglass. That allows for the antennas to be located internally. and the RF signal to continue to propagate. The remainder is a steel with a shaft to provide the necessary structural capacity. There's no practical solution that allows you to retrofit these towers so that it would be a uniform 36 inches.
Well, you could continue the plastic down to the base. So you could expand, just as a bit of a background, I managed Verizon Wireless's real estate portfolio for quite some time, so I do have a little bit of history in telecom. You could expand the plastic, so it would be just a thicker pole.
What I'm being told is that's not a practical solution. There simply
Practical or
would be...
affordable?
Pardon me?
Practical or affordable?
Well, affordable and practical. The concern would be as it relates to attaching it to the existing steel, the cracking of the plastic in the future, and other difficulties in maintenance and serviceability. It's something that they simply would not be able to pursue. I mean, these towers were designed at a time where it wasn't really contemplated that you would need to replace those antennas. The information I provided, I think, illustrates that what Sprint is attempting to do here is to install antennas that will allow it to increase the number of frequencies that the antennas will support. Currently, those antennas only support the 900 megahertz frequency. They want to, for capacity reasons and also to line this up for their 5G rollout, they want to replace that antenna with a larger antenna. It's about a 51-inch antenna. They want to put a 72-inch antenna. They need to increase the width. So it's not possible to keep it contained within the existing canisters, and the practice in the industry and the approach that's been taken throughout, you know, if you drive around, this is simply the only practical solution to accommodate the need for the upgrade of this facility. It's not something that they can practically do.
Is there one of these poles located where we could just take a look at it?
With the bump.
With the top,
Obstacle.
Well, I mean, I noticed them because I'm in the industry. There's one up.
May I ask Brenda a question? Brenda, given your experience, are you aware of any poles where they have extended the plastic down to keep that look of a monopole?
These are the two.
I've seen very, very unique things. When there's a will, there's a way, you know, and if they can fit those antennas, you know, in facades of buildings, it's not a practical solution. The practicality isn't the issue here, it's affordability. And that would be my thought.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Joe?
Can I ask, Kristen,
Thank you.
did we ask for town council opinion?
That was Paul Sagarino.
Paul and I,
Yeah.
both, because we did get a lot of paperwork from the attorney and said, how should we respond to this? So we did ask town council. We also, town council did advise us to review the lease agreement. The lease agreement does allow them to, make some upgrades within the site, but it was noted that the agreement is up in 2021. So to the extent that we might want to include certain discussions in that, to the Board of Selectmen in that renegotiation of the lease, that's another option.
So in other words, if the town is all on the same page and they don't accommodate what we're asking for, we could petition for this lease not to be extended.
The lease is up in 2021, so we can talk
The Board of
about,
Selectmen has the power to just not renew the lease in 2021.
My recommendation would be not to renew the lease until they can make this work, because, you know, it is going to cost them a pretty penny to modify the structure. In addition, if they want the longevity of that lease and the longevity of the network, in that area, they'll make it happen.
right. So the question that the Board of Selectmen, not Board of Selectmen, the Building Department brought up said, well, how many antennas are in, and they're just looking to modify one set of antennas. There's 3 sets in this pole, correct?
I believe there's just 2 wireless service providers.
Oh, okay, sorry.
There's a third available.
Oh, there's a third slot. So wouldn't those other 2 also want the upgraded antennas, and is it gonna be,
Flip
this and then
Yeah.
back out, or is it just gonna be one consistent? So, and that was the origin of the building department's comments was, well, why don't you just widen the whole thing now so you can accommodate the infrastructure
Right.
as they bring it in. So as I mentioned, that, you can decide to take no action, you can take action with the conditions that we've discussed. You can take action with the conditions we've discussed, as well as take these conditions and also send correspondence to the Board of Selectmen in their lease discussions in 2021. I mean, I don't think Verizon's going to want to do things twice, so.
That's right. So they upgrade and they lose the lease, a year and a half from now, and that makes no sense.
This is why it would have been very helpful to have some input from the Board of Selectmen, but we don't, so we have to move forward without knowing where they stand. So given what we've discussed and what we learned, I would suggest that we approve it the way you have written it up, and that approve it as a monopole, and at the same time, we can send correspondence to the Board of Selectmen as to why we came to this decision, and we can acknowledge that we don't know if this is enforceable, but we believe it would be enforceable when the lease came up.
We can certainly do that. We can ask them.
Great.
Great.
All right.
I mean, I would like to see the difference between what the monopole is going to look like and what that's going to look like. I mean, monopole's going to be, 36 inches wide?
It's gonna be
the whole
very
way.
large, yeah.
And so,
Yeah, increase the radius by 6 inches, I believe,
the
right?
whole thing, it's, right, so I don't,
Yes,
I'd
Mike,
like to see what the difference would look like, quite honestly, but
did you have a question, Mike?
Just a quick comment. In addition to what you suggested, I'm for that. I think we as a town kind of have to get our act together as far as all these
Yes.
poles and antennas, because this is just coming up every
Yes.
week. And I think we as a town need a better policy. That means putting together a committee and today we have to live to fight another day, but I think we should prepare ourselves for the future
Well,
somehow.
that's what Kristen's suggesting in terms of, it's not even so much a committee, we need someone with expertise to advise us.
Absolutely.
So that we, then that committee could come up with the right policies.
Absolutely.
I completely agree with you.
Like we did initially when we came up with the overlay district, is what,
Yes.
right?
Which was great,
Yeah,
but it was a long time.
right. Oh, no,
Okay.
I understand. I agree.
So do you have any comment you'd like to add before we
Well, I
find
guess
out?
I'd just like to understand what the board is suggesting its motion will be, if I can.
Okay, what we're suggesting is, and we can give you a copy of this, is
So it's
that,
2D is the actual effective, A, B, and
We
C is
would-
just history of.
okay, so that we would approve it with the requirement that the applicant extend the width from the top of the pole tapering to the ground as it is today to look like a flagpole and paint it in the same grayish-blue hue. That's the main gist of it. There's other things in here that you'll have a chance to read. That's what we're suggesting.
Well, with the understanding, I guess, that the board's exceeding its authority based upon,
Well, it's a suggestion. If you
we
choose
can't-
to ignore the suggestion, we are going to be recommending to the Board of Selectmen that they take it up with you when you renew your lease in 2021. Okay?
yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this matter? Seeing no one, I think we should probably move forward.
Do you want the motion?
Yes, please.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the request of a minor engineering change for property located at 84 Bedford Street to replace 3 antennas and 6 remote radio heads and 6 coaxial cables and replace the top 10 by 24 wide section of the tower with a new 10 by 36 wide section to the equipment on the existing cellular communications tower as reflected in the plan set entitled BS45 XC 830 Pine Haven Cemetery, prepared by Hudson Design Group LLC, dated June 16th, 2019, and revised to July 16th, 2019, consisting of 12 sheets, subject to the following revisions, terms and conditions as printed.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just as an addendum,
Yes.
they're doing this change But if you look on the highways when you're going along, some of those have 6 or 8 arrays, and they're all different kinds of antennas. There's
Yeah,
flat
they're-
ones, there's round ones, there's, yeah.
They're not inside like this one, though. This is
Right.
considered a stealthy antenna.
Right, because of its location. It's in a residential neighborhood, it's in a cemetery, which is, as you said, a sacred place. So it's different than on the side of a highway. Okay, thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 7A, matters of appointment. Could I have a motion, please?
To take item 7A, 7B, 7C, and 7D together for discussion purposes.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 7-0. So item 7A is a continued public hearing, petition to amend the zoning bylaw Article 5, dimension regulation schedule, to modify the height and dimensional requirements of the high-rise IH zoning district submitted by the planning board. Item 7B is a public hearing, petition to rezone the property to the high-rise industrial IH district, 3 Van de Graaff Drive, American Landmark, LLC is the applicant. Item 7C is a public hearing, petition to rezone property at the high-rise industrial IH district, 400 to 600 Summit Drive, Gutierrez Company is the applicant. And item 7D is a public hearing, petition to rezone property to the high-rise industrial IH district, 60 Blanchard Road, 60 Blanchard Road owner, LLC is the applicant. And please come forward. I do think these are things we're going to want to discuss together, but I do think we're probably going to want to discuss the individual properties.
I'm first to
Individually as
discuss
well.
the amendment, then I think we should talk about them together and then as individual questions come up, everyone's
Because I think the properties are very different from one another. So,
So Liz is, I'm just going to quickly primer what I'm going to do. Liz is passing out 2 documents. One is in portrait, which is the amendment that we have submitted and is in front of you now. The second in landscape is an amendment that we have proposed, which we're not necessarily going to talk about tonight, but I wanted to quickly give an intro because what we have, after the comments from Dr. Weiner and Board of Health staff, and I wanted to mention this first. So I want to go through this, then go through the amendment, go through a quick presentation of IH, where did it come from, because I think that's important. But in deference to Board of Health staff and the chairman, kind of go quickly through the amendment that we put together and have re-advertised for December 5th. So in taking the comments from Dr. Weiner and staff, there was a concern that the Board of Health, if life science was by right, that they would not have as much of an opportunity or not an opportunity to comment on life science uses as they come in. We have discussed that many times life science uses come in with different types of permits for hazardous material storage, discharge, generation, and that's a special permit that comes in front of you. If there's a change of use, it'll be a site plan waiver process, which we solicit comments from the Board of Health. And for any RDNA permits, the Board of Health has their own regulations that require them. And in talking through it, there may be some instances where if there's a life science use, and somehow it doesn't fall into those categories, and if there's a building permit for a life science use, to make sure the Board of Health definitely has oversight, as I think the intent from the beginning was to involve the Board of Health in every life science and biotechnology discussion that we've had. And if anything was to the contrary that I've said in the past, that was never the intent, and I hope that the Board of Health and Dr. Weiner feel that, we certainly want the Board of Health involved. So we have proposed a modification to section 10.5, which was additional regulations for biotechnology. This was a piece that we didn't change when we did life science. We probably should have, we didn't. And it is a little bit inconsistent now that we have life science in place. So we've submitted a change. It'll officially open on the 5th, that will allow for any building permit
So that's opening at our next meeting?
Officially, it opens at the next meeting.
So we should be able to get Board of Health input in on the
Yes.
amendment itself prior to that meeting?
I have a call, I'm out of the office next week, but I have a call with staff and Dr. Weiner that, and if anyone's interested, I'm happy to add anyone to that call next week. And then obviously, certainly would solicit from the board, and if the Board of Health would like us to attend one of your next meetings prior to, what we'd like to do is get any feedback prior to the printing of the warrant. The printing in January is usually required about Christmas, so certainly want to have continued discussion through December on these items, so.
Okay. Before we move on, is there anything that the members of the Board of Health who are here tonight want to say? I don't know if you want to stay for the whole meeting, so if you wanted to speak on this before we move on, you're most welcome to do that. If not, we can, okay. Welcome. Sure.
Is that open?
We've only received it today, or I've only received it today, but we do have a teleconference next week. The Board of Health is also considering a separate regulation. So what I think is that what we discovered at the last meeting, last public, is probably very good, because we found a small gap, a small loophole, and looks like we're closing it. So I thank very much everyone on the board on the planning board. Thank you very much.
And thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Weiner. Okay. So this we can put aside because we're going to discuss it at our
Yes,
next
well,
meeting.
put aside, bring it home, read it
Yes.
before the next meeting. So one of the things I wanted to do in recognizing it is go through high-rise industrial. So I'll begin here. So high-rise industrial.
That's scary.
It is, but it was popular at a certain time. The high-rise industrial district has been in existence since the 1977 rewrite of the zoning bylaw. The high-rise industrial building was literally written to accommodate the 1972 Baybank Tower. Was it anything before Baybank?
Middlesex Bank.
Middlesex Bank first?
Oh, my.
So the Middlesex Bank Tower. And at that time, in the 70s, it was really even before the 70s, in the 60s, well, I'll tell you where it started. So the idea if you're an urban planning geek like the two of us sitting over here are, so this kind of, the Industrial Revolution, the 20s, how do you organize chaos? Cities were super chaotic and dirty and everything was everywhere. And then you had the constitutionality of zoning accepted in the late 20s. So it was, okay, we can zone stuff, we can tell people where things should be. And then there was this kind of whole idea of how do you organize cities. And what happened was you had kind of the garden and the park, these towers, which was the beginning of these giant towers, these tons of green space around them. But it was just green space. It wasn't really, usable. And that concept kind of sparked a lot of the urban renewal of a lot of the cities that had these, small little neighborhoods, everything was everywhere, to try to organize the chaos. And these kind of towers in the park organize where things are. City Hall in Boston, and that whole area of Boston, let's try urban renewal in the West End. You can decide what you think about that, but thank goodness they didn't make it to the north end, because the north end is pretty nice as it is. And as you can see, like the UN Tower, there's, and we've all been to cities where it's just these giant towers, these plazas that are kind of barren around them. And then the public housing really caught the wind of doing it. So you see a lot of public housing projects across the US. A lot of them now torn down, but these kind of large towers with all this green space around them. Oh, isn't it so wonderful? We have all this green space, but really, what was it? Or is it even green space anymore once they paved it because everyone started driving cars? So then we built New England Executive Park, which was wonderful, but it was designed in a time when that kind of theology was what people did, and it was good at the time. And this is a picture, and I think this is early 80s from the buildings around it, but so you had giant setbacks, a single tower. That's in the IH district. The IH district was designed for this building. New England Executive Park was laid out. I think this was late 80s, this picture, or this map. And then what was your reaction? It wasn't human scale. In a lot of the housing projects, there was no ownership of space, so it was high crime rate, social problems, and it was all single use. Housing's here, retail's somewhere totally different, you ate somewhere else. And now, as you've experienced being on the planning board, that we want to promote human scale, interaction, mixed use, diversity, and walkable communities, not how do we get everywhere the fastest we can get in our cars and, really separate all our uses, so experience versus efficiencies. So that's why I think IH doesn't really work, because it was based in these principles. And I think overall, I think Tony and I, when I first got here, had conversations a lot about, like, what is IH? What do we use it for? Are we really going to build these, towers in Burlington? With that, I know we're talking about how can we, accommodate, life science in IH, but I think in general, we needed to break it down of why IH needs some modification. So what we have proposed, what do I have next? So what we've proposed is that we take the front yard, so the front yard setback originally was, I'll go back to, so we had these giant setbacks from the edge of the property. So what you created was this pattern of just huge buffer zones, but you had a really high building. We don't think, I actually was talking to someone, they said, what was it, like fall zones around the building? I said, I don't think so, but that's a good point. But anyway, you had these, really large setbacks for the buildings because it was designed for that building. So what we propose is to take the front yard from 50 to 25. So we're reflecting a little bit more of IG, but extending it a little bit more. So side yard to 25 from 50, rear yard 25 from 50, IG is 15. We do keep the distance from RO, which is that you do have to keep the yard 100 feet away from the RO district, whereas on IG, it's a function of the size and width of the lot. So we thought that was important to keep that. But one of the most important things, and did you cross out it on everything? Oh, well, it's supposed to read 90, not 80. 90 feet. And that it's 80 feet in IG. 90 was literally just when we think of life science to try to get a floor to floor of, we needed that a little bit more to get the floor to floor height if it was going to require all the ventilation. And then reflect a minimum feet between buildings. For the
Quick
dense.
question before we move on.
Yeah, sure.
FAR, how does this differ from?
FAR
The
is
districts.
unchanged and is exactly the same as if these properties were IG.
Right, but how does it change, how does it vary from other districts? What are the?
So the FAR is applicable in the the IG and IR zones, and it is, this amendment does not change FAR.
Okay.
When we passed the life science amendment in January, we did increase FAR for buildings that had life science uses to a 0.5
No matter what district they're
in both IG and IH.
to 0.5
To
from
0.5.
0.15.
Yes, that was the change that was passed in January.
So am I correct in understanding then that if someone were to put a life science building in one of these properties, FAR changes from 0.15 to 0.5?
Yes. That would be the same if it was in an IG property, so.
Okay.
Meaning that the three properties you have right now in front of you for rezoning, the 3 Van de Graaff, 60 Blanchard, and the Summit site, they all could go to 0.5 today,
Anyways,
because they're all IG zone properties, if they had life science uses, the percentage of required life science uses to trigger the higher FAR.
a little
So they
history,
can do
maybe?
it anyway.
Mhm.
So why is this necessary?
This is necessary for
In the zoning and not in the...
the difference between IH and IG is life science is allowed in IH, and structured parking is allowed in IH. Those are the differences, other than the
So
differences that
these
we've
three
outlined
properties are
dimensionally.
currently IG?
Mhm.
So they couldn't do,
They couldn't do structured parking, and they can do life science by special permit.
okay, so they could do life science, but only by special permit?
Yep.
No parking? Yes?
Maybe, if my memory doesn't serve me correctly, please correct me. But I think the initial view behind putting in the FAR was to make sure that the buildings weren't occupied to an extent where the parking would have to be
Yes, I
ridiculous.
understand.
Okay, so now that we're saying 50,
I understand.
okay, 50, I don't know if everybody else
There's
does.
fewer people in these
Correct.
buildings.
Okay, that's what I'm
So,
getting at. That's what I'm getting at.
Yes, I did
Okay,
get that.
thank you.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
No, no,
Thank you.
no. If anyone has any questions along the way, I'm happy to
Okay,
talk through it. So the second piece, because in discussion about structured parking, we would prefer to allow for flexibility in development and allow for the possibility of additional green space, but not penalize a building height for structured parking, was to incentivize integration and under-building structured parking. As you can see in a couple different buildings in town, Keurig has structured parking under the building. And so therefore, we have proposed in the notes section in the density table, which is the second page of the portrait handout, portrait orient layout handout, is that we would allow a maximum of 2 levels of parking above the average finished grade, but excluded in the structure height. Levels above 2 shall be included in the height. A conversation that I've had with the building department, which I think is a very good point, is how should this have a required distance from RO property as to when you can allow the height exclusion?
what would that bring, so 2 questions on that item, on number 7.
Mhm.
First of all, is that 80 supposed to be a 90?
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yes.
second, if you had a 90-foot building, and then you had 2 levels of parking under it, what would it bring the building height to?
It would be in 20 to 24 feet more, so it would be, so that's the question. So a question I think that I want to pose to this group, and we don't have to resolve it today, is do we remove the 2 levels? Do we say just 1 level is excluded? Or do we include that 2 levels only if it's more than 300, 350, 400 feet away from a residential neighborhood? So if you look at this diagram, this is the function of height from a residential as to how you get to the 90. So for 200 feet, you need to be 30 feet. For 100 after that, you can go to 45. So at 30 at 300 feet, you can go to a height of 45 feet from a residential district. And going on. So you actually, you're at 600 feet away from residential before you can even begin to think about 90,
Okay.
a 90-foot building.
Okay.
In contrast, I drew a diagram of the Baybank building at the end, that we're actually reducing the total height by 60 feet in the district.
But it wouldn't be
Moving
60
forward.
if that 90 was moved up to 114. It would be less, but still less than the Baybank Tower.
But still much less than
Yes.
155. So we are taking a significant height reduction in the district. But again, wanted to incentivize, in Woburn, they exclude structured parking underneath buildings in the height calculation.
Underneath the ground or underneath?
Underneath the ground is not included.
Not included.
But
Okay,
this
so-
would be from ground to finished floor area. So anyway, I just wanted to put out there that we're still thinking about what that mechanism should be. We want to make sure we're incentivizing at least some parking under building, but how does that function of height relate to residential districts? The one thing we didn't want to incentivize is like the 5/5 building that we talked so much about. So we felt that 2 was a good number to be considering, and then after 2, it would definitely be part of height, so.
Okay.
So, anyway, we don't have to discuss it now, but I would like some feedback from the board as to, should it be just one level? What should the distance be from residential, as we continue this discussion? So with that, I wanted to bring up height, that you do have to be 600 feet away before you begin to reach 90 from a residential district. And, let's see, and I think I'm going to leave it there. And if there's any questions about the amendment themselves, it's really, our amendment is dimensional in nature to change the IH district to a more workable district that is still different from the IG district. So it is unique. As I mentioned in January with the rezonings, with the life science amendment, the IH district has 3 properties. This is proposing it to have 3 more properties, but still, compared to the number of properties that are in the IG district, it's tiny. So I think that it's important to think about all of these properties as they come before you, but I think it's a good, just a good conversation to have to amend the district to really get to the goal of what we want to, and what we want to see in terms of building shape, size, and form, and the uses that we want to promote in Burlington.
Question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Baybank building is no longer in the IH district because it's within a PDD, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
But
What are the
I
height
did want to give you
okay.
the history.
Okay.
Yes.
Just, I didn't want to confuse people. So there are 3 other areas that are zoned IH, not in a PDD.
Yes, so the IH, so it's the Hilton
Currently.
Garden, the building, the Marriott, and recently, the rezoning for the Oracle site, that,
Oracle Garage. It's
That,
just the garage.
The garage
the
itself.
garage site.
itself, yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you had to be very patient before you got a chance to present.
Can I have a couple questions, if you don't mind, on
Yes.
this, as I get the background? So, thank you, Madam Chair. So my questions here is, I guess, the difference, right? I think you said, so if we say that it's life science with the special permit is one of the differences, right?
In IG, yep.
In IG, but typically, special permits, I haven't really seen one, I think, denied, right? So let's say it's a give me, right?
It's not,
Yeah.
I'll object to that. We have discretion when it comes to special
No
permits.
discretion, but I've never seen one denied.
Yeah, but you can put conditions.
Yeah.
have been
I'm not-
involved
so
in a
again,
denial.
I've never seen one denied.
I have seen one denied. It was not a pleasant thing.
Okay, one got denied, so most likely, the great majority of them don't get denied. And
Yes.
So the real kicker, I think, is what we're really talking about is structured parking, allowing structured park for that. That's what I'm getting at. One question I had is, how high is the Baybank building?
155.
155, and how about Millipore?
It's not 155.
No, it's
How
less
many
than-
stories is
So
Millipore?
less.
5 stories, it is, again, Scott Weiss from
Hi.
the Terrace Company, for the record. It is, I believe, 70 feet?
Okay,
Yeah.
It just looks
15.
taller because it's on a hill.
yeah, and then Keurig, how tall is Keurig? Anybody know?
I don't think it exceeds 80.
So it's, depends which side you're looking at it from. I
Okay.
believe it was 80 feet,
Okay.
but there is parking underneath it that extends that height. There are 4 levels of parking underneath the 6 stories of building that are there.
But you have it built into the hill.
But it's built into the hill, so and the zoning, the PDD zone that was set up had different heights allowed to make up for the difference
Right.
in
We're
ground
just talking from bottom to
elevations.
top, that's all kind of, I'm not worried about. So we're talking kind of, you're saying 12 feet per, 12 times 4, right?
I believe
So you're talking
it was-
about 130.
It was about 120 at its max, as measured from the low ground side,
Okay,
which
thank
is
you.
the north side.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right.
Is this going to increase density? My question to the director was, is this going to increase density, this change?
The amendments, so if you take the floor area ratio at .5 that's unchanged, you still can't build more than the .5. So,
But if you were previously, if you were in one of the other districts, you had a .15. The .5 is only for life science, correct?
if you have a life science use,
Mhm.
you could increase density to .5 with a previous amendment. This amendment doesn't change that.
Right.
Well, some of that increase, though, is floor height and so forth. Oh, okay, no.
Okay.
I don't think we can afford to move towards allowing increased density, or you'll never get in and out of Burlington in the morning.
So as I mentioned as part of the presentation in the January Life Science Amendment, Burlington on average is built at a .42 FAR. So you have buildings that are .5, you have buildings that are .6, you have some buildings that are .2, you have some buildings that are .15, but on average, the landscape of Burlington is about .42. So if you look at Burlington Woods, that's actually a pretty good example of, mid-fours for how the landscape would look with that type of FAR.
Thank you.
Please.
Well, Madam
Go
Chair,
ahead, thank
members
you.
of the board, for the record, Robert Buckley, representing both Nordblum Companies for 60 Wheeler Road, ALP, American Landmark, with respect to 3 Vandegraff, and the firm is representing Gutierrez, but we have Scott here, who's probably as good as we are. He can talk to the site. I would just like to indicate why we're here, at least for the 2 properties, Vandegraff and Wheeler. We do not have a user. What we're trying to do, about a year ago, when Kristen put on the forum as to life science and why Burlington should consider life science, there was a panel discussion here that was quite informative. This is the future trend in this area, and surprisingly, while Burlington does have life science, the communities around are grabbing most of it, and capitalizing on the amenities that Burlington has developed. And this is the future in terms of the high-end development, as is a migration out of the Cambridge Kendall Square area. Surprisingly, there's quite a bit of life science in the suburbs today, as Matt Daniels pointed out at the last meeting. Burlington recently received the platinum designation with respect to life science. There's been a lot of interest in Burlington by life science users as they look at sites, but of those who attended the forum about a year ago, one of the key questions or the key comments was, these companies that put a tremendous amount of money in the development of their facilities are not going to go places where there's not an as-of-right permission to do so. There aren't amenities, and while we've said in the past that structured parking for the general office building is cost prohibitive, in these buildings it is not, because they make so much investment in the building, and their principal asset are the people that work there, and they're willing to do so because it's a way of recruiting. Burlington has been very proactive over the last 20 or 30 years in trying to, as I referred with the staff, catching the wave before the wave crests. And this is just an attempt to put in place in the marketplace, in my mind, a zoning template that works so that if a user comes along, that Burlington is ready to capitalize on that user. It is not being used to increase density. I think from my perspective, the biggest issue are those two things, that it's as of right, which anyone who's appeared before this board or any other board in a sophisticated community knows that a site plan is just as difficult as a special permit in terms of the issues that you look at, the analysis that goes into it, your requirements, the discussion that you get from the board. So no one's trying to avoid that aspect. The second is the structured parking. The employees want to be close to the facility. There is a difference in the construction. I can defer to the experts on that, but there's a different floor-to-ceiling requirement for life science. And the employees want to be close by in the building. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, there's a lot less impact because you don't have as many people in these buildings. You do have an office component with the lab component, and your bylaw addresses that under the IG. But at least with respect to 3 Van de Graaff and 60 Wheeler, where there's not an active life science user on those premises today, what they're trying to do is position themselves to take advantage of the next growth industry in Massachusetts. And those who were in attendance the other day when the Representative Gordon's Economic Development Committee at the state came out and made a presentation, it was phenomenal what they were talking about, the growth, the exponential growth that's occurred in this industry over the last decade and where it's going, and the jobs and the from a financial standpoint, the financial stability that it provides a community, because it's diversifying your product base. It is providing high-paying jobs, which translates into people who want to live in the community, pay the taxes, maintain the schools, which is an additive in terms of providing all of those benefits. So from our standpoint, I mean, Scott can talk to his situation a little more in depth, but they have a world-class user on site, and these companies grow and buy and want the ability to expand as they go forward. So I look at it, and when we saw the designation, my phone rang off the hook in terms of is Burlington considering, because we're looking at Woburn, we're looking at Billerica, we're looking at Chelmsford, and what's the atmosphere in Burlington? So there are people out there looking, and it's going to become increasingly, I think, more as, when you look at what the cost of space in Kendall Square is, and you have access, you have the amenities here. You can get in, but.
Okay, so you're representing those two properties. I know you also represent
Right.
the Summit Drive property, but since we have Scott here, can you explain, I understand why it's of interest to those two properties. Tell me why you want to do this for the Summit.
Sure. Thank you for the time. And let me first start off with, this is, obviously a very big picture perspective in terms of life science in the state of Massachusetts and growing out of Cambridge. And we've heard the presentation, and we have a premier life science user in Burlington right now with Millipore Sigma at the Summit site. So congratulations to all of us for being able to bring that type of user in site and to the town. As you guys know, we've been here before. We have a permit in place. We've invested millions of dollars at 4 Burlington Woods to convert that building to be a lab-ready building as well. We see, as Bob mentioned, that the marketplace is such that not only do you need to very often have a permit-ready type environment, or not a special permit. I know, as you said, Bill, a lot of the special permits are ultimately issued, and they are given very often. It is very critical to the industry. I think it was something that Matt Daniels from JLL mentioned as well, that there are many sites that get passed over simply because they have a special permit requirement and the time frame that's involved on those. So we have a site that's built out. It has Millport. They are essentially full at the moment on the site. And so how did we get here? About more than a year ago now, they approached us to ask us about an expansion. They were acquiring a company. They, Millport,
Okay.
approached us asking us about expanding on site because they were acquiring another company, a firm in California.
I thought that was impossible on that site because
Right.
you'd already reached FAR.
Right, so they approached us and asked the question. We brought it actually informally to the town, asked Kristen informally, had a conversation with Paul. We brought Millipore and connected, when I say Paul Sagarino, the town administrator, had informal discussions at that time about a process that would involve going to town meeting, would involve a number of other things to try to rezone, maybe create a planned development district, do something else, any type of thing. And they opted to go elsewhere at that time. I think the acquisition stayed in California where they were based. I don't have all of the details on that. And so we weren't going forward. The site is built out. The town obviously has made and adopted some changes back in January that allows to promote life science development, which we could essentially expand that site with the additional FAR allowance up to the 0.5 for a life science development already. So this change would allow for that to continue to occur on the site. Would make it an as-of-right, more appealing thing, would allow for a potential expansion or growth of the summit as a life science center, and would give the ability to plan the site with a structured parking, which would be more desirable and as opposed to having a sea of parking out there or additional parking out there at that on that site. So that's why it's appealing to us at this point. And it is something, I know we had talked that we had no intention to build more on the site. We had talked about that when we were doing the permitting at the time.
It
And
was stronger than we don't have the intention. And that's why I was shocked to see this, because we had extensive discussions at that time about how the property of the canyon was actually, used in order to get to your FAR that you were looking for on that site, and that we were assured that there would be no further building on that site because it had been exhausted. So
that is correct.
where would you be building on that site?
Where would we be building on?
If you were to build an additional building on that site?
I don't have a plan that shows where we would be building. We can talk about that in a second, just to address, you're right, we said we were not planning to build on that site.
Ever, yeah.
And we went forward that way, and we did not build. We talked about the construction process, that the fill that was put in there does not support a building, and any construction would be very difficult and costly on that property.
You mean on the canyon property?
On the former DOT land, that's right. It was incorporated into the
Right.
Summit property because that was a requirement that it would be part
Right.
of the same parcel, which it is. So we did not plan to. Again, Millipore came to us, asked us about a potential expansion. We explored it, then this effort is coming forward. That seems like a good life science campus that would have potential there. And there is the ability, I think there, you do have a aerial of the property. So that, it's a little difficult to see, but if you can make out the 400, 600, I don't have a pointer. Do you guys have a pointer? No.
We can see the 400.
Oh, there, 400, 600 building, that's the Millipore building and the parking around it. There are some lines drawn on the land, which is on the top of the page.
Sorry.
Oops. And with that, we've completed our presentation. And you can see some of the setbacks. You can't get to the height of the building that we built until you get to the building because of the setback
Oh, for
requirements.
residential.
So we're at 70 feet after the line in there. So, well, it's not after that line, I think it's the line before, but you're at 75 feet is the maximum height. That building is 70 feet tall at that location. So,
If I understand
know,
you correctly, you're saying that that building could not have been built at that height if it were any closer than it is to the residences that
It
are
could be a
on-
little bit closer, but not much.
Not much, okay.
That's
No,
right.
it couldn't, because you have, actually, the line closest is the 75 line.
It
Okay.
says 70.
So,
Right, right.
so if you're at 70, yes, essentially, you couldn't move it closer without being lower,
Okay.
because you have 75,
Yeah, I think,
75, 60, 45, 30.
right. So as you get closer, obviously, any building would have to be smaller than that. Anyway, there's a large parking field in front of, that's right, in that area, nope, on the other side.
So if you couldn't build anything closer to the residences that are there, because you're obviously looking for a building of some height if you want to market it as a life sciences building, where could it go except in the parking field?
So again, in the parking field is possible. There is some room up towards the highway, perhaps, that might be able to put a building, and then to squeeze in parking around that at some point in time.
That's very steep towards Mills.
It's very steep in there.
Yeah, there's a big wall. I walk up around, it's a nice walk. You can go all the way down the end and up around where
You can see
where
the-
the right-of-way was, and
You can see
Yeah.
the trails that we built in
Yeah.
up there that are in place.
Hills are good for built-in structured parking.
Hills are very good. And one of the requirements of our permit at the time, if you recall, for this was if the town had made some changes to zoning to allow a parking structure, we were asked to consider including it here. Now, those changes didn't happen.
In order
and
to
a lot-
increase green space,
Pardon me?
correct? That we wanted you to consider it so that it would increase green space,
Right,
correct?
and the area where the main parking field is located was actually was a slope that was filled in for the parking.
With a huge retaining wall around it.
is there any room behind Best Buy? Because if you go down around the corner of Best Buy, there's a significant distance between there and the intersection with Route 3 coming down.
Isn't
It's
that-
kind of steep.
But wait a
Right.
minute, Paul, isn't that right where your presentation board has the clover leaf?
No,
What?
that's not.
Okay.
So there is
All right,
a
just wanna
little bit
make
of
sure.
room.
Well, some of it,
There's a little
no.
bit of room that's there.
Yeah.
And obviously, the land that we controlled, to your point, the highway department actually provided the town and all of us at the time a number of different options that they have for modifying that interchange. And they don't include the land that
They
they
don't.
sold. So obviously, they wouldn't have sold it otherwise.
Never going to happen, anyhow. but-
So the idea of where a building could go, it has to be further away, obviously, from any residential due to the height setbacks that remain in place, that are there currently, that remain in place. It could go in the parking field in front of 400 and 600. It could be an extension off the end of 600, for an example. It could be potentially out in front of 200 up towards the highway. Those are potential locations for a building.
Okay, I'm going to
If I may, one thing that held us back was the Northwest Park is Water Resource District. So I was on a committee, I've been on some, but way back, when we were looking at that, and I think it restricted the people that would even consider that, because since it was water resources, if anything had to do, as far as the Board of Health and so forth was concerned, they just shied away from it.
Right.
And
So,
Yeah.
for this site, and obviously, Millipore Sigma is there, which, by the way, I don't know if you have had the opportunity to see the building and see a life science lab
I
facility.
can see their signs glowing from multiple locations throughout town. You're talking about inside. I know,
I'm
I had
talking
to
about
say it.
inside,
It is truly an eyesore.
The signage.
Yes.
I'm talking about the inside of the
No,
building.
It's a lovely building
And
with
if you
horrible
haven't been
signs.
in it and are not familiar with Life Science Lab space.
No, it's a
I'm happy
lovely
to bring
building. I
anyone
have
through.
no problem with the building.
Mm-hmm.
The signage is an enormous problem. And if you're going to build something else there, don't do that again. And
Point taken.
in fact, it would probably make this board, at least this member of this board, more amenable to your proposal if those signs were no longer there, or at least toned down. You can see them from many, many locations throughout town from the highway. It's really obtrusive.
The sign that faces the parking lot, there's nothing, you could stand there and look and it's just woods until you get to Lexington, I think, because when you go around the back, it's all woods up in there.
Yes.
That one, I don't care, it's your property. The people in the people in the parking lot are the ones that are looking at it, and if they're happy in the morning to see, because it's a piece of artwork,
I'm
really.
not talking about that one. I'm talking about the smaller, very intense signs.
That was a mistake, and the Board of Appeals had a meeting up there regarding that sign at one time.
Yes.
And I went to the meeting, and they did admit, and they told
It
them,
was a terrible mistake.
they said, you'll never see another sign like this in Burlington.
I hope that's true.
So-
Now, so we have a lot to talk about. To try and corral this, let's first go around the board and talk about the proposed amendment. And then we can talk about the individual properties. Does that make sense?
If people have questions on it.
Yes, right. So let's, Brenda, do you feel comfortable starting us off, or do you want me to start?
I don't have any questions at this time. I guess I'd like to do a little bit more research and check out the
Can
areas.
you go closer to your microphone?
sorry.
It's really hard to hear if you're really.
You have to pull
Sorry
it
about
really
that.
close.
So I guess I'd like to do a little bit more research on the properties, see the aerials, see where they fall in relation to the existing neighborhoods. But I don't have any questions on the proposal right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Paul, do you have any questions specifically?
No, but I just see the chairman of land use here, and I would suggest going to them, because they're, as you know, and Bob knows, they're very interested, they're good, they ask the right
Well,
questions, and
This is coming to them, too.
I know it,
Yeah.
but I was just saying that would be worthy of a good presentation.
Yes,
And
it
I
will
would like
definitely
to see
go
what they think about it.
We will.
Good.
Joe? Nothing? Mike?
Nothing at this time, Madam Chair.
Bill?
No, nothing, thank you, Madam Chair.
Ernie?
No, I think it's going to take some digesting.
I definitely agree.
Sorry, I
So
think
do
it's
we
gonna
want
take
to
some
discuss the individual properties tonight, or are we not prepared for that?
I'm looking at a map now.
Okay, I suspected that was the case. Do you have anything you want to add before I see if there are people in the audience?
I just wanted to add that we had mentioned in announcements that we were trying to hold the, we have a planning board meeting of the 5th, of December 5th. But sometimes, I find that zoning amendments, rezoning, sometimes it's easier just to have kind of a little bit of a roundtable discussion in subcommittee to hash out some questions. So we would very much like to try to schedule a subcommittee potentially on the 3rd, and we'll send out
What day of the
midday.
week is the
That's a
third?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay, thank you.
So we hope that we can get to these questions, because the planning board has a meeting on the 5th.
Right.
And that's the last meeting before Christmas unless we schedule another meeting. And we need to finalize, the rezonings are easier because it's, do you want to rezone or not?
Right.
The text amendment, I just want to make sure is completely ready to go before Christmas, before it goes to print. So some of the questions that I brought up about distance and distance from residential of under building parking and all that stuff, I would like to hash out. And sometimes that type of conversation is not as easy to do in the
No,
the setting
I
of the 5th.
definitely agree. So we'll have everybody get back to Kristen about the December 3rd.
I'll send an email out separately, I just wanted to put it
Okay.
on the radar for you guys and anyone else in the audience who wanted to attend to talk through this.
So to my mind, just so you know, I think of these three properties very differently, because two of them are existing buildings that will be then marketed for life science, and one of them is, we're talking about an additional building on the same site, so I see them very differently, just so you know. So, is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment on this? Please come forward. Thank you, Mr. Pearson.
Is it on? I think the green light's on. He has to get really close to it.
Or just take it out.
You can pick it up.
I can pick it up, but I can't dance with it.
Well, we could if you
If you
want
want.
Not going there.
Thanks.
You were going to say I can't dance with anything, right? My name's Monty Pearson. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 3. I'm also a chairperson of the Land Use Committee. And I want to give you folks the comments that occurred at the Land Use Committee meeting last week.
Thank you.
We have comments on both the proposal for structured parking and also on the 3 biotechs. So I will just focus on the 3 biotechs right now because that's where you're at, right?
Yes, we're doing the
Yes.
structured parking afterwards.
Okay. So I have let me start out with a question that came up, and that question is that if the IH district now has a 155 height limit, will the 3 new proposals, if they were approved, would they be grandfathered in to the 155-foot?
Well, actually, I think that's related to a question that I had asked Liz earlier today. I asked her, when we do this, would we be creating a non-conforming site?
Yeah.
And as it turns out, the answer is no, because none of the buildings on those sites right now exceed the 90 feet. So I don't think they would be grandfathered because they're not currently exceeding that.
But to Monty's question, I think are you asking if we rezone these to IH, which currently is 155?
Yes.
Will they be allowed to be 155?
Yes,
So
given that the application
It's a
occurred.
good question.
Yep,
Yeah.
the application occurred. So that got to the question that came out of zoning bylaw review as well. So in the sequence of approvals at town meeting, the text amendment will be first. And anything that is after that text amendment will be required to be in compliance with the amendment as it was approved prior. It doesn't matter if it was prior town meetings or literally prior to the motion at town meetings. So
Okay.
the text amendment will be first, so therefore, if it's 90 feet, all the rezonings will be required to be the 90 feet of the new amendment passed.
Okay, great, thank you.
That was a very good question. Thank you.
The second point is that our committee noticed that the IH district has parking garages by special permit. And it was mentioned before, special permit frequently means yes. My committee was uncomfortable with that, given the state of the parking structure bylaws as they exist now. And I know that, at least the last time I talked to them, that the zoning board bylaw review, the other committee from town meeting, had a lot of problems with the language that was offered by the proponent and wanted to make significant changes in that. And we're not going to go into that because we want to say that essentially what we would be allowing if we allowed three new IH properties, large IH properties, is a eventual likelihood of 3 new large parking garages in town. All of them at places that have a fair amount of traffic now, and therefore greatly increasing the possibility of traffic congestion in that area. If you think about where they're at, if the parking garages allow for an extra 200 cars, 300 cars per site, then there's a question about that.
Well, it is a very good question, and it's kind of, these two things are now interrelated, the one, the parking one that we're dealing with, because the parking, structured parking issue that we're taking up later, part of that discussion is that the reason we would grant someone a special permit for structured parking would be because we're getting green space. So therefore, you would not have a big field of parking and a parking structure. you would be removing the pavement and replacing it with a parking structure and replacing that pavement with green space.
Well, we're talking about
That's just-
density in terms of cars and traffic and stuff, not density on the site.
Well, but it's kind of the same thing, though, because if we make, if you, okay, so just some generic site, and you want to put in a parking deck, my answer is you can put a parking deck in, because you're going to rip up that parking lot and replace it with green space. So it's the same number of cars, it's just a parking deck instead of a big parking field. Again, this is all still to be worked out, but that's that's how I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
Can I, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Can I weigh in quickly? So, you also still have, the building's the same size. Whether you're a parking garage, you can only build to the .5. You can't build more because you can build a parking garage. You can build to .5. And also, the planning board has minimum and, minimum, maximum, and some of those numbers are a finite, no, it's a number. You can't build more parking just because you want to without additional special permits, and that's only more than 10% more. So, and part of the life science criteria, as you remember, in January, was that the parking criteria was a lot lower per thousand. So therefore, when you had, some of our larger areas like Oracle had, is an office environment, not a lab environment. And what they came in with the parking ratio necessitated more parking with the parking garage they built. A life science use, if the lab parking criteria is in there, is less than what that lab use would have been. So therefore, you still have, the building can't get any bigger, and the parking ratio is actually lower. So, well, you might have structured parking, you're not going to have more density because of the structured parking.
Meaning you'd have the same number of cars.
Or less.
Or less.
Or less.
Right. So therefore, if you look at this site, and as Scott Weiss mentioned, that we were very hopeful that that sea of parking could have been built into some sort of structure, so it wouldn't have to extend as far out as it does. But that wasn't available at the time. So that's one of the reasons why we would like to see more flexibility in underbuilding types of parking, so we could see a better configuration than this very large
Yes,
parking
but
lot.
as an example to what
And
I was
green
getting
space.
at, the parking deck, if there were one there, or structured parking, would not be in addition to the parking lot that they have. It would be instead of, and there would be green space there instead.
I see. Okay.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment?
Yes.
Just to your point, Monty, on 3 Vandegraff, for instance, the preliminary analysis would be that when we've looked at it, you might be able to get maybe 80,000 square feet addition to that building. It's not and surprisingly, the parking would go down, or the use or the population would probably decrease because the lab space doesn't have the same population numbers. So it's really, in that situation, a convenience factor. On 60 Blanchard Road, which is the Datacon building, which is the one that's down below,
Yeah.
there, the only solution, if you want to build something that's more responsive to the market, you'd have to put the parking underneath, because today the parking actually extends out to Wheeler Road, which is adjacent, and actually right, when I say adjacent, right adjacent to the wetlands. So you bring the parking in, and you go up a few levels. But that's basically, it's not being used to increase density to any major extent, at least on the properties. And even here, I think, it's more convenience and location, so.
Okay. Well, just to comment that while some people will be comfortable with that, other people in Burlington are not comfortable with parking garages in general.
I agree.
So.
And
that's
this one,
just-
I think, is different in that this would be increasing density. The other two would not. So that's the difference I see with the 3 properties.
Okay, but just know that there's some people who are not comfortable with more parking garages. And one of the reasons.
I'm one of them, Monty.
What? You're one of them? Oh, okay. Sorry to go on, but the other thing is that part of the reason people are uncomfortable with parking garages is that we have almost no control over what they look like or how they're used. And by that, I mean that people think of parking structures as being generally ugly cement block buildings, and that we have no real control over whether they end up being ugly cement block buildings. let's see. The other thing is that in other parts of the state and other parts of the country, people are putting solar panels on parking garages, and the one at Oracle has solar panels on it, I think, as well. But that was because the developer was interested in doing that, and we have no requirement that people do that. And so, my understanding that you could, I suppose, through special parking, require them to do that, but people would feel more comfortable if something like that was part of the parking garage structure requirements.
But if it's under the building, you can't really do that.
If it's what?
If it's under the building, you can't put,
Well, no, but you could, however, you could
You could put it on the roof.
You could put solar panels on the roof, though.
Yeah.
And that's just a kind of another general comment that we had, which is that, given that we are now a green community, meaning that we have officially acknowledged that climate change is actually coming,
Oh, yeah.
and given the kind of things that have been going on this fall in various parts of the world, it might be forward-thinking for our town to be considering asking people who are putting up new buildings to include solar panels. And we can do that because the green building, the green community thing includes upgrading our building codes.
Right.
So that buildings are already built with the strength on the roofs to hold solar panels. So that and the idea was, when they made those changes in the building codes, was that if in the future people are required to do that, you don't have to take a 5-story building and try to reinforce it so that you could put solar panels on it. And so all buildings now have that on, and you could now ask people to do that as a matter of course, not because they need to build a special building, but because they just need to add solar panels to a building that's ready for that. And I wouldn't have thought of that idea, except that both the town of Watertown and the town of, not next, the one next to Somerville.
Cambridge?
Cambridge?
No, north of the same.
Medford?
Medford, sorry.
Medford.
Sorry, I don't know if it's my geography or my memory, but one of those two things. Anyway, Medford just passed an ordinance too. Both of them require that new construction and renovation, major renovations include solar panels. And, and the argument that I would make to builders is that, within a few years, we're going to require you to build them. It's going to come, that we're going to require everybody to put solar panels on, because otherwise, the ocean is going to wash away parts of Boston, things like that. So why not put them on now and help prevent some of that from going on? So anyway, those are some of the things that we had as considerations about this IH district, and so we feel that without the parking garage part being really solidly set together, that we're really uncomfortable with adding 3 large properties with the right to have big parking garages.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment on that?
yes, please.
There was actually a forum, I think, Kristen, you were on the panel last week, right, on the climate change?
Resiliency Forum, yeah.
That was held at
Is that only
Northeast.
last week? Yeah.
Was it 2 weeks ago?
No, it was last week.
Last week.
Last week?
Yeah.
Where Kristen was on with a number of other people from Northeastern,
Anna Lexington, Northeastern.
Lexington. BSC put it on too.
Yeah.
It was sponsored by Middlesex 3, but Kristen was one of the panelists. There's a lot going on in climate, in towns addressing that, and they're all good points. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you had the first building at Fort Burlington Woods that was totally a green building, right?
Well, yeah.
LEED.
Yeah, Fort Burlington Woods was built as a LEED building, but we actually, some of the first LEED space in Burlington, LEED certified leadership in energy efficiency and design, it's green building requirements. We had some of the first buildings that were built. One of the first brand-new buildings that was built to a LEED standard is the Salesforce building.
Right.
That was
5 Wall
the
Street.
first at 5 Wall Street. That was the first brand-new building. Millipore is LEED certified as well and has solar panels on the roof. Solar panels on the roof of a life science building is very difficult because the lab space requires a number of air changes and equipment up on the roof, so
But
that
you
becomes-
proved it could be done, so now we can ask everyone else to do it.
That's what we proved
There
that
you
it
go.
could be
Your
done.
fault.
My point is that not only are the towns asking for it, but the users of the building today are asking for it.
Yes, because it's cheaper.
No, it is not. It really isn't. But their employees demand it. I did a project in Marlboro for GE Medical, was one of the tenants, and they said, we're doing it because our employees, when we go out and we recruit and they ask those questions.
You agree and come.
It factors into their decision-making.
If you think about it, people who work in those kind of firms would probably have a great deal of understanding about what climate change is about.
They actually, to quote the news today, actually, that Brookline just passed an ordinance where any new building, whether it be commercial or residential, cannot include anything that burns fossil fuel.
Yikes.
Wow.
Really?
That's taking it to an extreme.
Starting today?
Well, right, it was in the news today. Really? Just passed an
Brookline?
ordinance.
I can see it happening.
But my point was that your concerns are also
I think
being
that would be in the Republican.
realized and focused on by both the users and the developers.
Yeah, but I just think they need
Yeah,
to
I
be
can hear something.
thought about while we're thinking about the parking garages.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak? Please
Can
come.
I do just a quick reply to part of Monty's?
Of course.
Monty, you understand that we do not have design review even on buildings. So I agree that garages can look ugly, but so can buildings. In other words, it's very difficult. We've sat here for hours sometimes trying to convince people to make the building look better, and better is a subjective word.
Yeah.
So we don't even have that, we don't have that ability on buildings right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay? That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I assume that you can't require first-class design work, but if you go to Wellesley College, I just happened to be there, and they have a new parking garage which is designed to fit into a forest, and it has artificial poles that are painted brown and attached to the side of the parking garage. They're all within like a foot or so of one another, and it makes the parking garage disappear into the woods that are around it.
Did
I
you
want
take
to
a
look
picture?
that up. That
Oh, it
sounds
is.
really cool.
It's possible, yes.
That's Wellesley.
Tape on it.
Please come forward.
I didn't go there for a reason you did.
I really do want to look
Hi,
that up. That sounds cool.
is that the right, is it on?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, so, Dave Webb, also town meeting, also land use committee, but precinct 7, all of these projects are in my precinct, so I have particular interest in making sure that these projects are done correctly, and I echo, of course, everything that Monty said, especially about the climate change problems. But I've tried to make this concise, just a few questions. I'm mainly concerned here, I think Kristen already pointed out that the only one of these 3 projects on the high-rise districts that might have increased density would be the Summit project, Scott, that we've heard about. And so I'd like to ask a couple questions of him. You're talking about building a new building, right? In the present parking area, possibly.
Just to clarify,
Yes.
and I'm not looking to throw anyone under the bus, any of these sites, this site, the other 2 that are referenced, and I think Bob just mentioned, 80,000 square feet, could have additional density, additional building area density under the current bylaw as it stands today.
If they did life science.
If they do it as life science space, which, as we've all talked about, is less people dense.
Impactful.
Less impactful to, number of
Traffic,
cars
yeah.
and traffic and roadways than a typical office use.
But your proposal is for only part of your land, the Summit land, to be IH, or is it all of it?
It would be
Including
for
the existing Millipore building?
It would be the existing Millipore building. The 400, 600
Okay.
lots that
So-
are there
so
today,
in that case,
outlined up there.
In that case, your whole Summit area would be under these restrictions.
Yes.
And in the text amendment that Kristen is proposing, that would come before town meeting in January, that would be the 90-foot height restriction, right? And maybe some other things I'd like to
Yes.
read in more detail about. So if you built a new building there and maybe put some of the parking underground, is that
Or under
the
the
idea?
building or something like
Under
that.
the building,
Yep.
okay. So the other thing is the height of those buildings. So we're talking about a potential height restriction in IH of 90 feet. What's the present Millport building?
70 feet.
70 feet. So your new building could be higher than that.
So
Of course, you're on the summit of a hill.
Right.
So it might appear even higher.
So the Millipore building is pretty much at the top of the hill. If you look
Right.
around, the parking does taper off around it. The building at 200 Summit Drive, the existing building that was there before, the old
Right,
Siemens
right.
building, is 6 stories. It's actually 1 story higher, but is shorter because it sits
Distance,
downhill.
yes, I know it's a complicated area, height-wise.
But
Okay.
actually, a new building could be more than 90 feet if it included parking under, which, according to the way this is written, which has not yet been approved, it could actually be up to 114
Yes.
or so feet.
Well,
So
I'm
significantly higher than what's there now.
Certainly hoping that the text amendment will be approved by town meeting.
Oh, it would
To
have to
avoid
be,
that.
and but it's not even ready to go to town meeting yet.
No, I understand. But isn't this to be brought up before town meeting in
Oh,
January?
yes.
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 So that's my point.
Prior to the rezone.
I'm a town meeting member, I have to vote
Yes.
on it in January.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I will certainly be looking to support the text amendment once I get a chance to read it. Just completing the question about the summit, so you talked about a 75-foot setback from a residential area?
It's actually, it's 100-foot setback, and then you step up every 100 feet as you go beyond that by 15-foot increments that you can build. So you have to be 500 feet away before you can get even up to the 90-foot height.
So my concern
600
here,
feet before you get to 90.
as it was during,
But we can go through
Anyway.
that, yeah.
my concern here, as it was during our discussions about the canyon area a couple of years ago, is the North Street residents in Lexington. And are they, if you built this new building, how would the distance, I don't know how far away, they're probably 500 feet, right?
Well,
Are they affected by this? And how would they be affected?
The same line, the same distance would apply to them.
right, so those setback requirements are already in place in the bylaw. We had to abide by them for the Millipore building that's there today. The height limit that is in the IG district is 80 feet. You couldn't build a 6-story life science building within 80 feet, so we went to a 5-story building within 80 feet. The flip side of that is that the footprint of the building got bigger because it was the
Right.
same square footage one
The
way or
FAR,
the other,
yeah,
the
the
FAR. It was the same square footage, whether it was 350,000 square feet this big at 5 stories, or if it could have been 350,000 square feet at 6 stories, it would have been slightly smaller. But it was 5 stories because that's the height limit that's allowed.
But my concern is,
It couldn't have been any closer really to the.
right, but I'm concerned is the new building that you might be building there, which could be 90 feet or higher.
Only as far or further away from the abutters as the building is today.
Okay, so the current abutters on North Street
Yep,
might see a new building looming in the horizon,
yep.
might not be too happy about it, but it still would be within the FAR and the distance requirements under the new text amendment.
Right, if it would be
Okay.
as far away as the current building is or further.
Okay. And their abutters, they will be informed about all this? Because they're in Lexington, so they're Lexington, Burlington.
Are they informed of the text amendment or just of a building?
So project.
Yeah.
The text,
No.
The text amendment is just amendment to the.
Right, I don't think they're informed, though.
Until it applies to a site.
Right, so, right, but what I think you're getting at is that residents in Lexington have not been informed of this amendment. They would
Right.
be informed if this passed and then a new building was proposed. That they would be informed of. But this change, they probably are unaware of.
Yes. Okay, and the other quick question I had, I just wanted to confirm with Kristen that the text amendment that you're talking about, was that with the discussions with the zoning board of appeals, the zoning
Bylaw Review Committee.
review board?
The zoning bylaw review
Sherry and
committee?
the zoning, yes.
ZBRC.
They were involved in that?
They are.
They
are currently-
they will be.
Okay,
They meet on the 11th. We would invite them to any of our meetings.
Okay.
Sherry offered some questions.
They're well aware.
Yeah.
okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ernie?
Well, just one more thing, I'm sorry to be so interruptive. In my other role as a member of the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, I know Sherry Ellis, who is the chair, could not be here tonight, so she asked me to make sure that I let people know what went on. And most of our discussion at our last meeting was revolved around the other rezoning
coming
on
up,
Ray
yes.
Avenue, the one that's coming up. This one, we had a little bit of conversation, but I'm not really sure that I am capable of telling you exactly what it is. And since this
Okay,
is not,
because, I mean, we're going to be having
Yeah,
another
right,
meeting with them, and so,
Okay.
Thank you. Don't worry about that. All right, is there anyone else in the audience that wanted to speak on this matter? No, okay. And if the board is amenable, I think we can continue this to our next meeting, and we're going to get back to Kristen about the subcommittee meeting in the meantime.
so moved.
Pardon?
This is a public hearing.
I think we need a motion.
Ma'am.
Yeah, we need a motion to
Make a
continue.
motion. The board is amenable?
Continue these matters.
I don't think so.
Joe's getting old.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
Please.
Motion to continue these matters to the planning board meeting of December 5th, 2019.
Second.
Third.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Impember, I just want to let you know that last weekend gave me an excuse to spend this weekend south of you.
All right.
See what we can do about next weekend,
Thank you.
this weekend.
College driveways never die.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to take items 7E, 7F, 7G, and 7H together for discussion purposes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Nay, okay, so 7-0. Item 7E is a public hearing, petition to amend the zoning bylaw, Article 2, definitions, and Article 4, use regulations, to address and define uses pertaining to parking structures, submitted by Escadrille Realty LLC. Item 7F, public hearing, petition to amend the zoning bylaw, Article 5, dimensional regulation schedule as it pertains to parking structures, submitted by Escadrille Realty LLC. And item 7G, public hearing, petition to amend the zoning bylaw, Article 7, parking structures, to modify the requirements for parking garages, submitted by Escadrille Realty. And item 7H is a public hearing, petition to rezone property to the general business district, 1 to 3 Ray Avenue. Ray Avenue Trust is the applicant. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chairman. Thomas Murphy here for the applicant, and with me is Michael Murray from Escadrille Realty LLC, who's the proponent behind this. I'm going to let Mike address the particulars. He knows it better than I. Just generally, this was motivated from a need for parking down by the Escadrille. And in Mike's discussions with staff leading up to this, it kind of evolved into some of these other discussions that you guys just spent with the structured parking and things of that nature. So there's a little bit of overlap of the new parking categories. Our project is going to deal with a parking deck, not a parking structure, or structured parking garage. I'm going to let Mike address the particulars of the project. He ran through them quickly at the meeting we had 2 weeks ago, and he has a better handle on it than I, so.
So we know him to be a very efficient speaker.
I'll try to go a little bit slower.
Thank you.
Much slower. So again, on the board, this is the same presentation that we had at the last meeting. To start with the definitions, with our initial conversations with staff, it was suggested that it would be beneficial to the zoning bylaw in general if parking structures were defined into different categories. So that's what's been done here, and most of that language actually came from staff. So what we did, within the definitions currently, there are no parking structure definitions of any kind. They're mentioned within the use table, but that's really the only definition that the bylaws have. So we've created a new section within the definitions for parking structures, and then did the subsections to break out structured parking, which would be more than just one floor of a standalone parking structure. And then integrated structured parking, which would be incorporated into a building. And then the parking deck, which is what we're looking to get amended, to be allowed by special permit in the BG, which would just be one level, a standalone structure, which would just be one level above the grade. So you'd have the grade level of parking underneath and one level above.
Okay.
And the next section, so then this is the use table, and this is where I mentioned you can see the cross-off area for 4.3.2.9, which is where parking garages and/or parking structures for more than 3 vehicles is really the only definition in the bylaw currently, and where it is and isn't allowed in the different districts. So we're striking that, adding the 3 new definitions that we added. We're bringing all the same uses across through all the different districts, with the one exception of allowing the parking deck by special permit in the BG zone. And then the next section, we went through this with discussions. We knew that the town wasn't going to want parking structures just popping up everywhere. So we thought about what kind of restrictions we could do, which tie into some of the conversation that you had with the last application, last amendments. So here what we're doing is putting a restriction in that if a parking structure were to be included in a site development in the BG zone, that the maximum building to ground area ratio would be reduced from 33.33% to 25%. So that would, in theory, create a situation where they couldn't just build a bigger building and have more parking to accommodate that. If they put the parking structure, that structure A would be included in the ratio, which is further along in the bylaw. So that would decrease the size of the building A that they could build. And then we're also on top of that reducing what the footprint on the site could be. So with that in mind, the hope would be that for a redevelopment of a site, that if they were to take advantage of this, they wouldn't have to take advantage of this, but if they were, that it would reduce the building footprint because they wouldn't be able to go to 33%, but they'd be able to have more parking without having to have a sea of parking.
So would the result then be increased green space?
That's the intention for a redevelopment.
I think we have to probably be a little bit more specific about that.
I want to add as well, this is the BG district, which is a 30-foot height requirement. So, I mean, what can you do in 30 feet? Whereas we were talking previously about kind of higher, higher instead of wider. This is BG, it's 0 to 30, and so therefore you're talking about 1, maybe 2 stories. So this percentage actually is a lot more directly effective to achieve what you're, I think, talking about.
Right, I just think we're going to, and I'm not sure exactly where it needs to be stated, but I think it has to be very clear that the reason for having structured parking is that, anywhere, in my opinion, is that we would therefore increase green space. In other words, we're not adding parking, we are putting a different kind of parking in order to increase green space. I'm not sure if I'm expressing that
I
well.
understand where you're going with
Okay.
that. And when we get into the specifics about what we're trying to do, I'm just going through the bylaw changes first. We can probably have further discussion on that as far as that, how that would affect us.
Okay.
So then the next section, unfortunately, there were a lot of sections that we had to amend to accomplish this. This is section 7, which has to do with parking requirements. And just above is the existing language and how it's written in the bylaw currently. And then the proposed below, which is just breaking it out into subsections. 7.2.7 is just basically making a header title. And 7.2.7.1, the only amendment to that, which is, so the same language as what is currently and is above, is to add the 2 new sections of the use table, 4.3.2.9.1 and .2. And then 7.2.7.2 is to add a further restriction for the parking structures, is to say that no parking structure which would be allowed in the BG district would be located within 200 feet of a residential district. We did that with the understanding that no resident's going to want a parking structure overly close to their property. So we felt that these restrictions were a good starting point. We're obviously open to comments. I think that was the last section.
Just the rezoning.
Oh, and then the last amendment would be the rezoning at 13 Ray Ave, which I'll actually get to after a couple of slides to look at. Just as a general overview for the town and parking structures, this is a current zoning map for the town. The dark red area is the BG zone, and I'm gonna dive into those different sections. But as a point of reference, the yellow zones are the PDD zones, and though, just as, again, as a point of reference, parking structures are allowed within those PDD zones currently, all of them except for, well, I'm not sure about Arbor Point and Grandview Farm. I don't have the language. They may or may not be included. I'll assume they're not. The dark purple, which is kind of hard to see there, there's the 3 properties, the IH, obviously, you had in-depth conversations about that. They're allowed at those properties as well. So then, we're really obviously talking about the BG, so the red zone. And on the next slide, you'll see in the center of town, actually, if you could toggle back and forth 1 or 2 more times, that in the center of town, the red goes away, because in the town center overlay district, parking structures are currently allowed. So this wouldn't affect that in any way because it's already an allowed use. And then the next slide, you'll see more red disappear or be removed. Now that was removed because of the 200-foot residential buffer that we're proposing, and all those properties that were removed would be totally encompassed by the 200-foot buffer, so this would not allow parking structures in those areas. So the next slide shows the areas of town that are remaining, and then we'll go zoom in on each one for the next slide. So this is at the intersection of Cambridge Street and Wayside Road. And you can see in the top right, there's a hatched area that shows that's the 200-foot buffer into the BG zone in that area. So that hatched area right there is where a parking structure could not be built. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be built on other portions of that site. The Escadrille is towards the bottom at the corner of Ray Ave there.
So this zoning change would affect that entire piece of, all those properties, right?
All those
there?
properties in red, it would affect
Okay.
those, yes. And the restriction for the buffer would be to the rear of what would be the Crossroads Plaza.
So that runs from Ray Ave all the way down to Wall Street. So
Wall
that
Street.
whole includes the Target Plaza and the next one. Okay,
Where,
right.
yes.
Yeah.
And
I
then
know
the
what you
next,
mean.
Jack's Coal Fire Pizza.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And the restaurant whose name I can't pronounce.
That's right.
And this next section is on Middlesex Turnpike, which is,
Sorry, it also includes Capital Grill across the street?
Yes.
yes, it did, yes.
And all of Wayside.
And then across from Cambridge Street down where your place is, that is, where is that?
There's a couple of strip malls there.
Big and Tall and...
Yes, yeah, those properties there.
Is that there? I don't know.
The locksmith.
So that's all of the Capital Grill plus LLB plus the, not your average Joe's, all that area.
Seasons.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Okay.
So this change would mean that all of these properties and the ones that you're moving on to afterwards would be allowed to have parking structures?
Within the other restrictions of the change of the building to ground area ratio.
By special permit?
By a special permit. And as a point of reference, for Wayside Common, as an example, they're at 25% for the building to ground area ratio.
So they couldn't.
So they would not be able to,
Without taking the
without,
whole thing.
without a redevelopment of the site.
Are any of the other ones that you've highlighted so far, and if you go past the other ones, or any other ones have the same condition?
They would all have that condition, but they all have different percentages.
But any of them at the 25 year, besides the...
Mike's got a list there.
Because the one across the street with the Big and Tall, that would be probably...
The Crossroads Plaza, for example, the 34 Cambridge Street is at 22.6%. I don't have site plans for every single one of these sites.
Big
I
and
have most of the larger ones.
I'd be interested in seeing how each one of them is applicable or not.
Absolutely. And I mean, you could, as Mike said, they couldn't do this without redesigning the site, but that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
these
But
days,
under
yeah.
special permits, too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
So the next section, just highlight, and this is the same condition for all of these, it's just showing the different areas that would still be allowed with the reduced footprint area. This is Middlesex Turnpike and the major intersection there is Wheeler Road. So kind of the red area in the middle is the Bed Bath & Beyond site for point of reference. And then, and as you can see over on the right-hand side, there's a buffer area there, and in the middle on Wheeler Road, there's a buffer area because it's residential. And there's one up, it's not showing very well, but on the Best Buy site, that most of that is restricted as well because the land next to that is actually zoned residential.
So that's the Best Buy site? Yeah. Right?
Yeah, up at the corner of the highway in Middlesex Turnpike, yes. And the next slide shows the mall. The mall is the large red area. It's at the corner of Middlesex Turnpike and Burlington Mall Road. And then up Mall Road, you can see there's BG zone there, but most of that backs up to a residential zone. So there is a lot of restriction there as far as the buffer goes and not a lot of area left to be able to develop a parking garage. And then the last area is...
Sorry, Michael, what's the place across the street from the mall? Is that?
On Middlesex Turnpike?
It's a Tower Records
Kelly's
Plaza.
Down below,
No,
keep on going
you mean,
south side.
where the Frisco's is, I think.
Barnes and Noble.
Oh, no, that's,
The Frisco's gonna be
Barnes and
down a
Noble.
little bit, right?
It's in the yellow. Barnes and Noble is
Barnes
red.
and Noble and Yard House, yeah.
Oh, that's the red, okay.
So the next slide shows the last area, which is at the intersection of Middlesex Turnpike and Bedford Street, which is directly across from Miter Field. So there's a various assortment of different buildings there. Again, most of these sites are restricted by the buffer because of the residential in the area there. And the last slide, I believe, is, so this is 1-3 Ray Ave. So getting to the reason that we're looking to do this. As it stands now, we have a condition at the Escadrille where during our busier times, nights and when we have functions, we have insufficient parking. We have other properties located near this, across on Ray Ave and a little further down Ray Ave, where we can try to use some of that for overflow in our busier times, which are at night, and those buildings are occupied mostly during the day. But the condition as it stands now still arises where we just don't have enough parking. To exacerbate that, we have recently purchased the Cycle Loft building, which is on the other side of the Escadrille from this. Now, that building has, on the site plan, it has 20 parking spaces for a building that size. And even at that, those 20 parking spaces are not realistic, as 4 of them are tandem parking spaces, and 6 of them are down underneath the building, where if you were ever to go down and look at them, I'd find it hard to believe that you could convince me that 6 cars could park down there. So I'd say maybe it's 4. So there's, in my mind, only 14 parking spaces on that site.
Is there an entrance from down there?
An entrance
To the building? From down below?
into the
You
garage.
have to walk up.
Sorry, this is not a garage, it's a basement.
Does that exacerbate the problem at Cafe Escadrille?
Well, what we're trying to, we've purchased the property, and what we're trying to do is make that building marketable and to do something with it.
Okay, it doesn't exacerbate the problem at Cafe Escadrille, though. It's just another problem for you to deal with,
Okay, well, all right.
right?
Exacerbates their problem.
Exacerbates your problem, but it's not a Cafe Escadrille. I mean,
Right,
that
okay.
building is not taking anything away from, is not increasing the parking problem at Cafe Escadrille.
No, but what we would like to do is be able to put a realistic amount of parking for that building and use parking that's near that building that's on the Escadrille site, because they're direct abutters, and be able to use that in tandem. So to do that, we would need to increase parking for the Escadrille.
But you're actually, so in essence, you're going to exacerbate the problem at Cafe Escadrille by taking part of their parking and using it for that building, for using it for Cycle Loft?
Yeah, but the reason that we purchased it, someone else had purchased this building, and they had no luck renting it because one of the major
Right.
issues is that there isn't enough parking there.
Right.
There's no way to get more parking there.
No.
So we've purchased it because it's beneficial to us. We have a potential to be able to solve that problem and make that site better, make the building better. But to do that, we need to have a parking solution, and this is part of potential solution for that.
So Mike, would you guys, like literally carve off some of the Escadrille and combine the site, or would you just share the parking?
We'd be looking to share the parking.
I have to be honest, I have a great deal of sympathy for the problem that you have at Cafe Escadrille. I had a lovely party there for my parents recently, and my husband had to drop us off, and he went and parked at Total Wine because there was no place to park. I understand the problem that you're having. But buying the adjacent property that has an even worse parking problem and then making the parking problem at Cafe Escadrille even worse just doesn't make sense to me.
Could I just jump in on that one? Because I think if you look at it from a different perspective, there's a very large building there that's been vacant for quite a while, and we all know what happens to vacant buildings. And you can look at this as trying to solve a problem from a town, maybe a neighborhood perspective, of making that a useful building, rather than just sitting there like a big white, inviting vandals, inviting whatever, getting run down. I would suggest that that's not a good thing either. So this is, and I grant you I'm spinning it, but the
Very
point
nice spin, Tom.
it's a realistic problem. That building's been vacant for 5
Yes.
or 6, 7, 8 years.
But that building is, you're not going to use that building as is, right?
Well, they could.
I would think you would buy that property to relieve the problem that you have at a Cafe Escadrille and use it for parking.
That's not financially stable.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Okay, but
I actually, I hate to disagree with that. That was exactly the point I was in, like, that has been, unfortunately, it's a beautiful looking
it
building.
is, but
it
I
just
don't think it,
hasn't been used. It's been vacant the whole
right.
time, like it
But
needs to.
we're talking about changing an entire zone that gives people all over town the ability to put parking garages in.
Right.
Because there's a problem at Cafe Escadrille, and now we're going to make the problem at Cafe Escadrille worse?
Well, no, but I think the reality is, if you just take that site out, you still have a problem at Cafe Escadrille.
I agree with you, but I don't want to hear about buying this property being purchased, now reducing the parking that's available at Cafe Escadrille.
I think what.
Can I add something?
Yes, I was just say, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that potentially, you give some of the land parking to the old Cycle Loft building, and then you're building a structure right over here?
Yes.
So then it accommodates parking for, or it gives a greater use of the old Cycle Loft building and accommodates the parking. And this is just my understanding of why they're doing this.
Oh, I understand why they're doing it. I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my question. So you're gonna put a deck here? Because, yeah, we use the Escadrille, and we're not getting any younger. And so you have to go down over the hump and so forth till you get down there. So if you're of a certain age and don't walk that well, and can't get a handicap plate.
You valet.
Huh?
You valet.
So how many parking
Do they
spaces would
valet
be in the structure?
in the back? I've never seen the valet bike, but just so I'm clear, you're gonna put a deck here so that you'll double the parking on that spot.
It wouldn't be exactly double. There's, in the lot that you see right there, there's 40 parking spaces.
Okay.
So the net increase would be 34 parking spaces.
So you'd be increasing 34 parking spaces. How many are you going to use for Cycle Loft on the other end?
I couldn't give you.
That's an important part of the equation.
Kind of depends on what the use winds up being over there. If it might be office, it could be.
That's a very important question, because what you're saying is this is going to increase your Cafe Escadrille parking by 34 spaces. If you end up using 20 spaces on the other end for Cycle Loft building, you've really only increased your parking by 14 for Cafe
And then change the
Escadrille.
zoning on the whole town.
Right.
14 spaces.
If we could do this for just this lot, if there's a way,
Yeah.
let me know.
Spots on.
I wish you
understand
could,
that and that's why I went through this. And if there's further restrictions that would need to be put in place, then we're open to discussing that. I mean, what we tried to do was not come up with something where this is the only place that this can happen.
No, I understand that, and I appreciate that. I wish you could just do it for this one spot too, because it would certainly make our lives a whole lot easier. I have concern that this could result in a small benefit to you and an enormous problem for us to deal with throughout town. But one of the other things that I think we would want you to consider is that the whole idea of allowing for structured parking is so that we get a trade-off. We get green space. We don't put in structured parking so that people can have more cars. We put in structured parking so that the footprints are smaller and we get green space in the trade-off. And I don't see how you're going to do that.
Well, one of the areas, again, I mean, whether we want to keep it separate or not, one of the areas that we could definitely increase the green space would be, it would be honestly negligible in comparison to the size of the parking garage, parking deck. But that's actually not increasing the amount of pervious area.
No, but it's increasing the amount of parking.
No, I understand that.
The reason for increasing the parking through use of structured parking, traditionally what we've done is that we do that so that we get green space.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah.
May I make a suggestion? Maybe if green space wasn't a benefit, would we be open, if it's, if either we're gaining green space, or maybe we're gaining something like solar panels, or, or something else that is energy, like the land use committee had said.
My suggestion would be, I think there's areas in the center of town that I'd like to see green space, more than I'd even like to see it there. And maybe we can look at off-site green space.
Transfer of
Transfer
development
of
right, but transfer of green space,
Transfer of
not
green
development
space,
rights.
that's right.
I like that idea because I definitely think that there's a greater need and the green space would be more appreciated there. But I still am very hesitant to create this to change this through the whole district, and I envision people lining up to put parking garages in all of those red spots that you showed us, and that concerns me greatly. I wish we could take this alone and deal with it. That would be
And
much
I-
easier.
Trust me, I wish we could
Yeah.
do the same thing, and
Yeah.
like I said, we tried to put the restrictions on, we're open to more restrictions. We just, as I said, we didn't want to narrow it down to just basically be spot zoning and saying this
Right.
is, the only place that we think this is appropriate. We think.
I understand the dilemma you're in,
Right.
yes.
Right, and this isn't a total site redevelopment. If it was, then the green space would be a totally different thing, but we do actually have a significant amount of green space on this site. Some of it's down in a wetland area, but still it's green space, and that's why we're still would be under the lower ratio of the building to ground area that we're proposing.
So is this piece of property part of the site where Cafe Escadrille, or are they two
They're
separate
two
pieces
separate
of
lots
property?
currently, but
Okay.
we'd be proposing after the change to the zoning district to
You
BG. that
joined
we would be
them.
Combining the lots.
But the green space you're talking about is on the Cafe Escadrille lot, correct?
Yes,
Okay, not this one?
not this particular
Right.
lot, as
Okay.
a project and as a total.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I think it would be helpful if Mike already did part of it, showing us where other parking structures could possibly be located, but can we get in?
You showed it, in the red,
Yeah,
part?
right, in the red.
Right.
Where the
That's not
in other parts of the town.
Right.
Because as you said, this can't be a spot zoning, so it has to
Right,
be
he
with the
did
district.
show
He
us.
did.
What's the question?
I'd like to see that a little bit more in-depth, like,
There were a lot of them. We
there
could,
were a lot of them, but there's some of them probably wouldn't make logical sense to change. I
that
don't know.
doesn't stop
I'm-
people from doing it.
Well, I'm talking economically. I mean, I'm not looking at their books, obviously, but you wouldn't take a brand-new mall and put a parking structure
Wouldn't take a
up there.
what?
Brand-new mall, if there was such, and put a parking structure up there in order to,
I think you absolutely would.
for what reason? You still, maybe,
You were-
that's what I'm trying to say. Can you increase the building? Can you increase the density of the building by doing it? 25% is what you're saying this would drop back to. So how many are already over 25%?
Just
Would
when
I
they
take-
get redeveloped, you don't
Would
know
I
what-
take down a building that was 35% in order to put up a parking structure so that I have less leasable property? I doubt it. But that's my opinion. That was your opinion, this is my opinion.
I don't actually have an opinion on whether or not you
Well, I
would do
thought you
that.
did
No, my
because you appeared to be
concern-
speaking, excuse me, for the whole board for a while there, because you were using words like "we" and whatever, without ever asking people to jump in. I'm concerned about that.
Okay, well, I
And I'll
certainly
do
never
it
meant to
publicly
be
because I've done
speaking-
it privately
Excuse
with
me?
you before.
I was not speaking for the board, and if that was the impression, I apologize.
Thank
I
you.
just said that in the past, the board has always discussed
how far
green
past?
space as a trade-off
I agree.
for parking structures.
I agree.
Well, that's all I was saying, Ernie.
Okay. But I would like to be consulted on that, like, what do you people think about it, rather
And
than we?
we are certainly going to get that.
Thank
That is
you.
what we used to do in the past.
Well, in the
This is
past.
very different.
In the past, the chairman would say, this is the proposal, now does anybody have a comment? And then
We are
the
going
chairman
to do
would
that.
talk.
We are going to.
Then the chairman would talk.
Okay, Ernie?
Yes.
We're going to all get a chance to speak. I really don't need you to school me right now, okay? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I make one other comment? on
Apparently,
this?
no, we all have to speak in order, Paul, I've been told. So why don't we start
I
with
did
Brenda?
not say that.
Ernie,
I
that's
said the
not-
chairman should not be the one to present her opinions first.
I am not
That's what I
presenting your
said.
opinion right now. Brenda, would you like to comment on this any further?
No, I don't have any additional comments this time.
Paul?
We had an event there at one time, a lot of people came to it, and they ended up parking on Ray Avenue. There are buildings there that aren't used in the evening and so forth, and if you valet parking, it seems to me you can valet them down there easy enough, it isn't that far.
And we do that currently, and we still end up with issues. Some people don't like to valet their cars. Some people, they don't even look for the valet necessarily, or they see the parking lot's full and they move out.
All right, it was just a suggestion. That was my turn.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
Well, I think I've stated mine, you know, I feel like I agree with the green space thing. I think that's what we've always talked about when we've talked about parking garages, was to create green space, but I don't, my opinion, I think it could be more valuable to the town to have it off-site in a different location, if that were something that could be accomplished. I mean, you know, I think it would be a big win. But, you know, that's one guy's opinion here, but I do agree. I think, you know, just creation of parking, you know, you need to get something in return, and I think the green space is what we've always discussed doing in turn for that, so. But I also think, you know, as I stated, and I know we differ on that one, but I do think that, you know, you've got a problem site with that building. I know it's been on the market for a long time. They've had a hard time. In fact, I had a client that was looking at it. He looked at it prior to, evidently, I didn't know anybody had purchased it, but he just said that the parking is just not sufficient to do anything there. So it's basically, that thing is going to probably remain vacant if there's not some solution to it, you know, and that's not good for anybody, you know.
I agree.
But anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Mike. Sorry. The site for the sale for the Cycle-Off building, that's complete? It's all done?
Yeah, we purchased it over a year ago.
So what's the plan if this doesn't go through? Do you know you were taking a significant risk was this the plan all along to hopefully?
No, this was not the plan.
Okay.
The plan was to purchase the property and have control over it because it was so adjacent. You know, we have the ability to try to use some of that parking on a limited basis during the day when we're a little less busy, but we'd have to significantly restrict it for nighttime use. So we'd, you know, further restrict what tenants we could potentially put in there. So, you know, if this doesn't go through, we're not going to turn around and sell it. We're not planning on turning around and selling it. We're going to try to rent it. We're going to try to get a good tenant in there that's going to stay. The uses that we could potentially put in there would probably be diminished based on the existing amount of parking and anything else that we could do with it. It's a large building for the site. There's not enough parking. It's a problem on top of another issue we have, and we think this is a way to help to accommodate that. We understand the concerns about opening this up to the rest of the town, and we're open to other suggestions of restrictions and narrowing it down if we have to. We want to do what's right for the town, as well as try to create a situation that solves a problem that we have.
Thank you. So going through this, you try and think of the benefits, right, of doing something like this. And a benefit would be, I mean, other than the green space, which isn't, I mean, with this plan not probably feasible here, the benefit would be taking a building that's been sitting there for years and getting a right tenant in there and getting use out of it. So that's definitely a benefit we don't, you know, we acknowledge. And I guess the way you'd have to do it is the tenants would have to match, just like you just said, where it'd have to be like a daytime, like an office type tenant to kind of like balance what your traffic is at the Escadrille.
Right, that would be the ideal situation, but if there was a little bit of overflow, if it was a retail use on the first floor, say, then, you know, if they went until, say, 6 o'clock, we start to get a little bit busier before 6 o'clock, but then after that is when we really have our push. So there's different options, but with the less parking, the less options we have. And if we can, you know, try to work something out and, you know, get that building to be full, then we can look, it wouldn't be a total site redevelopment, but we can dress up the building. We can dress up the landscaping on that building because, as I said, there's tandem parking spaces there which just aren't even feasible. So we could at least eliminate those. We could eliminate some of the spaces in the back. Again, it's negligible green spaces in comparison to this, but there might be other areas that we could work on with this, and Joe might have a good idea about a transfer of rights for green space. That might be something that we could look at. We're open to those types of discussions.
And another benefit would be, just personally thinking, this is just me, that we could even the score on some, I mean, even if it went through, they'd still, it's not like parking garages be popping up everywhere, they still need that special permit, so we could kind of even our numbers on declining some special permits. That'd be a benefit. to me.
And that's why we put it in for special permit. We didn't do it by right. We put the restrictions in for the building to ground area ratio because we knew that would restrict other sites. If they did a total redevelopment, then yeah, that would open it up for them. But maybe there is a different type of restriction that we could put in for, that the site has to have a certain amount of green space. And, I mean, maybe we meet that, maybe we have to make an adjustment to meet that. We're open to looking at things like that. As far as the parking structures go for other areas of town, I think, you know, you've mentioned it, Barbara, that it opens up flexibility for other sites, but I'm viewing it more as redevelopment for those sites. Unfortunately, that's not the situation that we're in here, so we can't, you know, just start from scratch, but, again, that's the situation that we're in.
Now that, I mean, on the flip side of that was a little bit in jest, but it opens up precedent too, like, well, the Escadrille got the site, we're applying for a special permit, why can't we get the garage? So that also is something we have to consider. Nothing further, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, first, I'd have to agree with Member Espaillo that with regard to the special permits of these other sites, which I have concern about, you provide one here. It's, like I said, it's rare that I've seen one denied. So you know, you're looking at those benefits of one building, 14 spaces, maybe a little trade-off in green space versus, you know, the other opportunities for structured parking in town, as Member Covino said, with no design control. You know, you're changing, I think, the character of the town for the benefit of what the folks here. So it's a trade-off, and I'd probably be leaning towards the side of, and I'm against spot zoning, but you're trying to benefit for the 14 spaces to kind of flip everything on its head. I'm usually not a big fan of. I try to think of, not today with the Escadrille there for your 14 spaces in the Cycle Loft building, which it hasn't been there for that long for those who have been around the town as long as most of us have over here. It's a fairly new building, so things come and go, and so now for one building, you're kind of changing that whole character of structured parking around town, which is difficult for me to swallow. So I kind of think of, you know, planning, right, 20, 30 years from now. That's where I'm kind of thinking for the benefit of the short-term 14 spaces. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ernie?
Thank you. First, in my role as a member of the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, since Chairman Sherry Ellis couldn't be here, we heard Mike, actually Michael wasn't able to be there, so Tom represented Mike. Tom Murphy was there. And one of the things that was brought up was that why are all these definitions in this proponent's bylaw change? In other words, why is this proponent bringing forth all three definitions? And that was explained, I think, by Tom, that maybe you can...
In my understanding, and I wasn't part of the conversations, but when they were meeting with, Mike was meeting with staff leading into this, it was, I think, looked at as an opportunity to beef up the parking structure bylaw. So even though two of the components don't even apply to our project, it made sense, I think, from a planning perspective to get them in there, knowing what else was coming down the road potentially. And so it was kind of piggybacked onto our proposal, which we were fine with, but it really, top two don't apply to us.
And that was also presented that way at the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee. These are just...
Can I respond? Since I didn't...
I guess, I'm the last chair.
Madam Chair. So when Michael Meyer came in to talk about this, we had a structured parking proposal 4 years ago?
Oh, a couple of them. The one that Larry put forward to...
Oh, no, the one that Larry commented on and where
Okay.
the green space discussion came, I don't know if it began, but was definitely discussed. In that proposal 4 years ago, it was to take the existing, in the use table, it's parking structures or parking for more than 3 vehicles. So if we were gonna, that's the only, there's structured parking in the whole bylaw. There isn't a definition, there aren't definitions for structured parking in that. That's the only provision. So if we were gonna talk about different types of structured parking, that's where these categories came from. And so we felt if we were going to eliminate 4329 as it was, and we were going to have structured parking in different types, it was important to discuss what they were so we knew what they weren't. So if we just said parking deck and we didn't really talk about the other types of parking, it was just a more full view of what structured parking is, especially as we understand structured parking is allowed in the town center, it's allowed in IH. So we already have it, we didn't have a definition for it. So that's where we came up with these definitions. The integrated structured parking was part of the discussion we had at that time 4 or 5 years ago, to do what we've been talking about, is to try to incentivize under-building parking. So, and it really came through kind of the public discussion of, we had approved the parking deck at Leahy, and at the time, way back when, in 2004, 2005, oh, that's that big, huge garage. Oh, well, do you mind the parking deck that was approved in the back? That isn't built yet, so I guess you can't on the ground think about it, but they, oh, no, I don't mind that. So it was okay, well, you know, what's the temperature for the different types of parking at the time? So that's where these 3 categories came from. So just as a background, I'm not going to speak for the proponent today, but as a background, that's where these 3 components came from, and it was important to keep all 3 components, whether we were gonna go forward with one or all, to just understand what they were individually and what they weren't. So it was easier just to define what they were. So that's where it came from. And when the proponent came in and proposed this, looking through our previous attempts at discussing structured parking, it made sense to potentially move these definitions along, because they're fairly standard definitions. We reviewed them against national definitions for structured parking, and as well as local other towns' definitions. So they didn't come out of thin air. So, but again, they're also able to be tweaked as we see fit. So
These are questions that were raised at the zoning bylaw review committee, not necessarily my questions. The second issue was this, and I think this has already been answered, this would be a principal use if it was on the 13 Ray Avenue property, rather. And Tom responded that the properties would be merged, and then that would make an accessory use, right? And members had concerns about the 200-foot buffer zone. Maybe it should be larger. That was just a concern. And also, one of the things that was raised at the very beginning of the discussion, if I remember correctly, was, you know, what are the unintended consequences of this? And I think we've been talking about some of that around what could happen in other parts of the town right now. In my own personal, I am definitely in favor of what Joe and Barbara are talking about, and I think most of the other members, more green space. And maybe could we build that into, when you put a parking deck in a BG zone, you either have to have more green space on your property, or like you do with conservation, when you steal some wetland, you have to replicate it either there or someplace else. Is there a way that we can actually codify that? I mean, say somebody else came in the BG zone and they didn't have any room to put, but they were willing to buy this piece of property in the middle of town or something and turn it green. Is that something you can
there's always a way to
include in
do it. It's just, do you know, how strict are you? How how quantitative can it be? Is it a suggestion? Is it a mandate? You know, we just have to talk through it. Of course you can.
In this case, if spot zoning was allowed, we might just be talking about this piece of property, but it's not. So is there a way to?
We can't put zoning in place that says you can build a parking deck at 13 Ray F.
I understand that. But could you put zoning in place that said you could build a parking deck in the general business zone as long as you replicated 50% of what you're going to put on the parking deck, as long as you turn 50% of what you're going to put on the parking deck into green space, either on your property or someplace else in town, agreeable or to the town. You could do that. Okay, so okay, so there's ways to.
You need to
different
figure out
ways
how
to
you write
skin
it,
the
but
cat,
of course you
right?
can do it, yeah.
Thank you. I'm good.
Okay, I think you you get the sense from the board that we all understand the problem that you're trying to solve and been worried about the repercussions on other sites. So I think I would like to ask staff to explore other restrictions that could be put in place so that we would have fewer sites to worry about this affecting, or in other ways that we could bring the green space into the equation. I'm very hesitant to try to solve what I believe is a very real problem on one site, but end up creating problems on other sites. That's what I'm very worried about. So I don't have an answer for that. I think we're going to have to spend a lot more time looking at it. And I think staff and you and zoning bylaw review will all work on that together.
Can I just ask one question on
Sure.
that? Is the concern for an existing site to come in and put a parking deck in, or limited to that, or is it a concern also of a total redevelopment?
For me, it's both. I don't know about everyone else's concerns. Because we have to be thinking about how this could affect things very far down the line. Some sites that we have now, we look at them and you think, well, they're not going to tear that down and start over again, but 20 years from now, they might. And this will still be in place then, probably. So.
For the redevelopment, though, from my perspective, is that, if you were able to incorporate a parking structure, and if there was some green space, additional requirements for green space, then that would create a more flexible situation for a developer.
Yes, the addition of green space.
Also benefit the town, along with the height and the parking and the footprint restrictions. And again, I'm open, I'm just giving you my point of view on it. An existing site that's already built out and just it's a different situation. I understand that. That's, from my point of view, those are the ones that we had to look at and say, what could happen? But again, I understand the concerns, so.
Right, and I think tying a green space requirement to it definitely is something we should consider and figure out how to do. We're not even sure exactly how to phrase that. I definitely think that could be part of the equation. So, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this matter? Monty?
I would like to make a couple of personal, I'm Monty Pearson, I'm in Precinct 3. And I'd like to make a couple of personal comments before I convey the feelings of the Land Use Committee. The first personal thing is that I would like the planning board to think really carefully about the term green space, because I have heard the term green space to describe a lawn. And a lawn is not a green space. Anyone who kind of wants to do environmental thing, a green space is a diverse habitat where different kinds of plants and animals could live. And I would urge the planning board not to make decisions about buildings or roads or things like that based on having a little extra lawn in town. That doesn't make the town a huge amount more attractive. Lawns and a handful of oak trees is landscaping, not green space. That's my opinion about that. The second thing is that, I'll just go into the issues that the Land Use Committee had with this proposal. And the first has to do with a 200-foot zone from residential that can, from the 200-foot barrier from residential. And the question is, isn't that a dimensional requirement? And isn't a dimensional requirement something that can be appealed to the Zoning Board of Appeals?
Good point.
In which case, that 200 feet could become 100 feet. So if I was to say that to town meeting, that would be the end of the likelihood of this proposal being passed. So I don't think that, that's just one comment. The second thing is that if that's true, then general business zoning goes throughout town, up and down Cambridge Street, and up and down Route 3, and up and down Route 128. A lot of spots zone business, and you're talking about a lot of places that could have kind of parking garages in, and I'm really sure that most people in Burlington are not looking for that kind of change in the character of the town to suddenly have parking garages popping up everywhere. No matter what they have on them, I like solar panels, but I don't think that people would accept dozens of garages with solar panels on them. That wouldn't be a good enough trade-off. And I think that, was it Ernie that used the term unintended consequences?
Yep.
There are so many unintended consequences built into this discussion that it gets me back to the old term, a can of worms. And the members of the Land Use Committee believe that this proposal raises serious long-term questions that we ought to address in some kind of series of joint public discussions between our three committees, and maybe have some consultants or something like that. And only really then could we have a proposal that might be reasonably acceptable for town meeting. And this idea of changing this really significant aspect of the bylaws as part of a request about one parcel is not the correct forum for doing this process. And I understand the dilemma that the Esquadrille have, and I'm sympathetic with that. But I really think that a town meeting is going to be looking for something more specific to solve their problems of a local business that people like, rather than something that could result in a lot of changes that other people don't like. And that's my opinion, but it's also opinion of all the other members of the Land Use Committee who were at our meeting last week. And so I hope you keep that in mind while you're thinking about what you're doing with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty.
Madam Chair, just had a
Yes.
question. So, Mr. Pearson, would, just your personal opinion,
Yeah.
if, based on the history with this particular site, restaurant that's popular with the locals, would you think that town meeting would go for a change of zoning just for that site, where that might be allowed versus changing the rest of the town for that?
Wow, I really don't have any sense of that.
Okay.
We've never had anything quite like that, so I'm not sure exactly what people would think.
Okay.
May I say one other thing about the building where the cycle loft used to be? Is that you notice in the presentation that was made that a whole lot of really tall buildings were built back in the 50s and 60s, and you notice that those buildings got torn down or gone, a lot of them. And the cycle loft is a mistake where I don't think we should keep making mistakes by doing more to the site. It was a mistake to put in a big building right there on that little tiny site. I don't know how that happened. Given the standards that you guys have now, I can't imagine how it happened. But, I think that you should tear the building down and make it be parking for the Esquadrille. That would make a lot more sense than trying to make it into a viable commercial site.
There's even a stream there.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Right there.
Yeah, it's right on the stream and stuff like that. Then they could have a parking lot on the whole site.
Thank you, Monty.
Madam
Is there
Chair,
any-
may I respond to one
Yes.
comment about the dimensional
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
variance?
Uh-huh.
So the 200 feet sits in Article 7. Article 7 is the general parking requirements and purpose for parking uses.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't sit in Article 5, which are dimensional requirements. So it's splitting hairs a little bit, and I mean, I think you can qualify it even a little bit more by adding just a little bit more language. But when you have a dimension, any building can't be closer than X.
Right.
But when you define the use itself can't be closer than X, then it's a use variance versus a dimensional variance. So depending on how you clarify it, so how we want it to read, and if it doesn't, then we should fix it, but how I think the intention is, a parking structure use needs to be at least 200 feet from a residential district. Is that correct?
Not the building.
Not just the structure of the structured parking, whereas then that gets into the dimensional. So therefore, the use itself can't be closer than 200 feet. So if you ask to vary that, it's not
Can't vary
200
use.
feet, you
Right,
can't
you
vary a
can't.
use because we don't allow use variances. So it's a small nuance, but an important one. That I think we need to understand, and I think that's what I wanted to point out, that this sits in Article 7 under parking, the uses of parking. And, whether we say no parking structure use, and just by that word in the BG district, but it is a fine point that's very important when you talk about what you can get a variance for, because I know everyone's, oh, well, you could just get a variance for it, what does the number matter? The number very much matters when you talk about if the number is something that concerns the use or simply a dimension of a structure.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify that.
Okay, but I think that that's a good explanation of why we should be taking some time to look at these things, because it involves, that's a very complicated way of looking at it, and I'd like to kind of like have a focus group of lawyers agree with you before I would be sure on that.
You've been here too long tonight.
And my oldest daughter is a lawyer, and I'm hoping she's not listening to this conversation, but I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Monty. Is there
Thank
anyone
you
else
for
in the
your
audience
service.
that would like to speak on this matter? Okay, seeing no one, I think we're going to continue. And we'll probably continue to have discussions offline. Okay, thank
Continue
you.
till,
Well, we don't have that much time.
right.
I think we have to
I mean,
continue
so
to the
it'll be on
next meeting of
agenda, I
December.
assume.
Yes, I have to be, I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I think it's going to be hard to get this ironed out for January.
Do you want a
It's
motion?
very tight.
To December 5th, is that what's on there?
Yes.
Ernie's going to make the motion.
You want me to make? Okay. Make a motion to continue these matters to planning board meeting of December 5th.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes that Liz sent over to us earlier this week?
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone? Okay. Should we vote on them individually? Are there people that can't vote on some but can vote on others? Anyone?
Yeah, vote on no.
You're exempt from this. All right, so can we take them as a group?
You sure? Want to do
Okay,
that?
all right.
Motion
Just
to-
ask if anybody has any
Are we
corrections
going
or
to?
anything.
Does anybody have any corrections to any of the minutes that they have not already given to Liz? No. Does anyone feel the need to vote on these individually because they can vote on some and not on others?
Nope.
No. Okay, then why don't we take them as a group?
Motion to approve the minutes of August 15th, 2019, September 5th, 2019, September 19th, 2019, and October 3rd, 2019.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? All right, 601. Okay.
I just wanted to make one comment, if I may, Madam Chair. So we will be up to date with meeting minutes, with these meeting minutes for regular planning board meetings by the next meeting. So we'll be caught up to date and be fresh and ready to go for the next year. So
Terrific,
Great.
thank you. Thank
we're on
you.
the ball.
In subcommittee
Consider
meetings, we're
October
only,
3rd pretty up to date.
Thank you, Don.
if I understand correctly, we have some subcommittee meeting minutes to
Correct.
do, but we're only doing those for current projects
Yes,
moving
and-
forward, correct?
Yes, so my main focus right now is regular planning board hearings, obviously.
course.
And then as we can, I'll probably pepper them in some more maybe next year.
Okay, thank
Cool.
you.
You get one and a girl.
Not a girl.
All
Dawn
right,
gets it
so we have a few matters for
Dawn, you're-
You
discussion.
both get one.
We need a planning board member.
This isn't the housing partnership. This is the committee to discuss
Oh.
the.
Oh, Northwest
I
Park.
apologize. The Northwest Park housing provisions is what this is for.
Did I write the wrong thing?
Yes, you did.
That's okay.
I apologize.
We take back the Atta girl. Sorry.
So that's what this is, looking for a representative from the planning board.
Yes, and actually, I've decided to appoint myself,
Okay.
so that'll be me. The next item is moving signs on the EV chargers at Wegmans. I know that this was something that It was Bill who brought that to our attention. Where does that stand?
Correct.
The EV chargers at Wegmans?
I know we talked about it with the building department.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've talked about it with the building department. I talked to Andy about it.
I'm just trying to remember what they said.
I'm sure they said that they would check it out. I need to follow up with them. I'm
Oh, okay.
sure that, I'm sure they're aware. I can definitely follow up with them tomorrow.
Okay.
Show you.
All I know is when I
have
showed
to-
the picture, it was, oh, no.
Exactly. It's like, oh, what
I can't remember the follow-up.
But we did, I don't know if the whole board received this word, but we did receive word from them all that the advertisements on the umbrellas outside
Yes.
of
Yep.
Cafe
correct.
Nero
Cafe
have
Nero
been
did.
removed.
Correct, yep.
And I also understand they're working on a new plan for temporary parking at the mall, which hopefully they'll present to us soon. Mike, did you have another?
Yeah, quick question for staff, Madam Chair, if I may. Can we get an update on assistant planner? How's that process going?
Oh,
So we want to get rid of
I'm happy to.
I'd love to hear.
We had 37 applications.
How many?
37 applications. 35 were good applications. I mean, usually you kind of
Wow.
get the top third, middle third, bottom third. We have called out 8 or 6.
You said 6.
6 or 8. 2 of which are like super standout. And then a few others that are also very good candidates. We did have quite a few candidates that said, you know, Burlington's the best place ever. I'd love to work there, but I graduate in May. And we were like, oh. But we do anticipate starting interviews the week after Thanksgiving.
Awesome.
And the way that we've done it in the past is we usually have, Liz and I will do the first round, and then if we decide to bring someone back, we're going to solicit from the planning board anyone who'd like to sit in on the interviews. And that's worked very well in the past, and also gives exposure to whoever it is, to all of you, which is very helpful.
They may change that.
So some of you have sat on the interviews in the past, but, so we'll keep you up to date. We'll send you the resumes that we've chosen to offer interviews to over the next week or so.
And
Awesome,
am I
thank you.
correct in understanding our goal is to have someone ready to hit the ground running on January 1?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
Great.
We want to try to get someone by the end of the year.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
But knowing it's, holidays, if they're working, I want to give them a lot of time, so.
Does anyone else have any other discussion items? Paul?
Just a question. One of our members resigned, long term.
Yes.
And we were going to honor him as we usually do.
Yes.
Sometimes, if things aren't done with a certain time, it's...
We haven't forgotten, Paul. I actually did speak with staff about that, and I don't want to talk about it here because Jack's probably watching. I hope, so.
Okay, thank you. No, I just wanted to bring it up.
Oh, we haven't forgotten.
We can't spoil the
Jack
surprise.
has been a member of this board for a long time, but also has contributed greatly to other boards in town and to town meeting for many, many years, and his contribution will not be overlooked. Thank you. Anything else?
Can I get a couple minutes for subcommittee? Are we there yet?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go for it.
So we met again for the short-term rental subcommittee.
Great.
And we're kind of at a crossroads. I think Bill's seen the minutes and has been involved. The whole question all along has been, shall we prohibit them throughout the town and just get rid of them completely, or amend the bylaw to regulate them better? And at this point, I'd like to just get the fever of the board or your opinions on just outlawing them completely. Because I think my personal opinion is if we amend the bylaw to regulate them, it's going to take a significant asset from the town to do this, to enforce. And as we've read and seen, especially from the stuff Liz sent us, it's not worth the bang for your buck, so to speak. So we've got the letter from legal counsel saying that it's well within our right to prohibit them. In our last meeting, we discussed that the only real benefit, we were trying to think of the benefits of these things, and there's no real benefit to the town of Burlington to have short-term rentals, except to private homeowners who make a small profit or whatever it is on renting out their homes. So there's no real benefit for us. And I think, looking at it from a business perspective, I think our hotels would appreciate not letting us have them. So I wanted to just go around and ask all of you guys what your thoughts would be on just outlawing them completely.
Okay, why don't we, just everybody take a turn and tell them what you think.
So, just define short-term.
Less than 30 days.
Yeah, I would agree that they should be outlawed.
Me
Paul?
too.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't see a need for it, really.
Okay,
I think I'm of the same mindset.
okay.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and I missed the last subcommittee meeting, apologies for that, Mike. But, yeah, when we talked about it, I had the easy job of looking into some background of other towns that prohibited it. With the California house rental murders, there was actually one in 2016 in Linfield that Liz helped us out there with the background on that. So there's a lot of towns and cities around the country that have prohibited. We have a lot close by that we wouldn't be out of range doing that.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Initially, I thought that maybe it might affect, because we were talking about seniors and having people stay, but that wouldn't be short-term.
That's
right?
correct.
So I agree with the majority. Thank you.
Well, there have been some big problems with it, two kids come in and rent a house, and then there's a party with 100 people, and
Yep.
they end up, doing everything but calling in the National Guard.
I think you got the temperature of the board.
All I needed. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Are you guys of that feeling? Like, I'm taking a poll here. Are you guys?
I think Bill said yes.
Initially I wasn't, but after looking into it, yeah, I don't think there's a need for it.
So you're, okay.
Okay.
And Barbara?
Yes, I agree. I don't see the benefit.
So I did talk to council a little bit about it, and I think actually you guys have had more feedback from her, but there is a defined definition from the city of Boston, or the state, that's been created. And she said that certainly it's a commercial type enterprise. If you wanted to regulate or prohibit short-term rentals as defined by the state in the RO district, you certainly can.
Yep.
And it's actually as simple as adding the definition, adding the use table line item, and
Saying no.
saying.
Is it RO and RG
We
as well,
we would
right?
need to decide,
Okay.
but you certainly could do that.
If we
and
prohibited
it's,
in one, we'd
that
probably
was the
prohibit
case.
it in the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There must
we-
be standard language for that.
Oh, yeah.
Because.
Yeah, the state has created definitions, so it's just really taking.
We could
those
probably
and-
do it by the next meeting.
Probably could do it.
It doesn't.
Well,
Does that go to town meeting?
it would need to go to town meeting. I would
Have
say
to.
let's put it on the radar for May, but I'm just saying, if,
Yeah, great.
it's very complicated if you wanted to regulate it and allow it.
It's a whole different.
It's actually
Easy to-
not so much. when
That
you
makes
wanna-
sense,
It's
yeah.
almost like a moratorium, like, just, but you're not doing a moratorium, you're just saying, yeah,
Saying
no,
no.
not in this.
Yeah,
it's-
not in these districts.
If you take out the residential districts, you've taken out 99.5% of, I mean, is there a residential house in a, maybe? but-
Maybe the mobile homes down on,
Yes, those may be allowed, but
House cleaner.
but not the rest of the mobile homes that are in the backyards of houses that the building department is having
Correct.
so much fun with.
Okay. All right.
So.
Fun though.
Motion to adjourn.
second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.